Chapter 3453. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's sensible appearance, Run Zimei's gaze changed a little. Then, she patted Bailey Hongzhuang's shoulder and said, "As long as we can survive until tomorrow, you will be my good sister in the future." Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. "We will definitely survive." Then, Bailey Hongzhuang began to bandage the wounds of the injured cultivators. They had already done some simple treatment before, but for some of the more serious injuries, everyone could only endure it. Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze fell on the cultivator whose legs were directly torn off. At this moment, his wounds were still bleeding, and his face had become very pale. After taking a closer look, Bailey Hongzhuang knew that he had already taken healing elixirs and blood-replenishing elixirs. He would not lose his life, but the process was very painful. If it were not for the fact that the injuries were left by the skeleton and there was still some black gas around the edges of the wounds, which constantly suppressed the healing of the wounds, the cultivator's current situation would be much better. Bailey Hongzhuang sprinkled the healing elixirs on the cultivator's wounds and used silver needles to help the cultivator poke a few acupuncture points, alleviating some of his pain. As long as they could endure through tonight and be safe tomorrow, the cultivator would be able to grow new legs after returning to Penglai Palace and taking the elixir for bone regeneration. However, he would need some new adaptation process in the process. After seeing this scene, Bailey Hongzhuang realized that she had to prepare more elixirs for bone regeneration in the future. Although they were often injured, such serious injuries were rare. However, in the training ground of the Inner Palace disciples, this kind of situation happened too frequently. "Junior Sister Bailey, thank you very much." The cultivator could not help but thank Bailey Hongzhuang after feeling that his pain had lessened a little. "Senior brother, you are welcome. Not only do I want to thank you for bandaging my wounds, but I also want to thank you and Junior Brother D for saving my life. If you didn't pull me up, I would be dead now." The man sighed. He was so close to losing his life. Compared to that, his current injuries were nothing. "We're teammates. That's what we should do." At this moment, Di Baichen had already walked to Bailey Hongzhuang's side. His elemental energy had already recovered, but based on the current situation, it would not be long before they had to make a move. "I will remember this kindness in my heart. If you need my help in the future, just let me know." The other injured disciples nodded after hearing the man's words. Although they didn't say it out loud, they had already decided in their hearts that if Bailey Hongzhuang and the others needed help in the future, they would definitely not refuse. When Bailey Hongzhuang was helping to bandage the wounds, Di Baichen went to Bailey Hongzhuang's side to help. It wasn't that he hadn't helped Bailey Hongzhuang with this kind of thing before. The more times he did it, the more proficient he became at it now. After Bailey Hongzhuang roughly treated the injuries of the injured disciples, the people who took over the battle became them. Chapter 3454. Following Bailey Hongzhuang's replacement, the cultivators who were previously holding on quickly retreated and sat aside to recover their yuan qi using spirit stones. At this level of cultivation, everyone had a lot of yuan qi stored in their bodies. However, to deal with the skeleton army, they had to use powerful martial skills to achieve good results. Therefore, the consumption of their yuan qi was extremely fast. Facing the densely packed skeletons in front of him, when Ziren couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. I really couldn't imagine such a scene even in my dreams. It's hard for me to imagine being drowned by these disgusting fellows. Even though they had faced many situations of being surrounded before, the scene in front of them was undoubtedly the most disgusting one. The consequences of being surrounded were also the most unbearable. Let's take turns to use martial skills. Every moment counts, Di Baichen said in a deep voice. Their goal was not to clear the numerous skeletons in front of them, but to delay until dawn. However, the night seemed to be exceptionally long. They had never felt that the night was so difficult to pass. Boom! As soon as Bailey Hongzhuang used her martial skill, a huge vacuum area appeared in front of them. All the skeletons that rushed forward were swept away in an instant. However, the skeletons behind did not feel anything and continued to charge forward. Skeletons were inanimate objects. They did not have any spiritual consciousness and only had the instinct to fight. Therefore, no matter how many skeletons fell in front of them, it did not affect them at all. The four of them had always been fighting together, so their coordination was extremely good. When they took turns to use their martial skills, they found a martial skill that had the best effect and saved the most yuan qi. In such a time of a race against time, as long as they could hold on for a little longer, it would be good. Big brother, how are you guys recovering? Rinzime looked at Ren Ziheng with a hint of worry in her eyes. They only had a total of more than 40 cultivators, and the number of cultivators who were seriously injured was not small. In total, there were only 10 waves of people who could withstand the attack. However, there were simply too many skeletons. Even though they were rich in essence energy, each wave of skeletons couldn't last for very long. Under such circumstances, the longer they lasted, the less essence energy they could recover. Therefore, the frequency of them constantly changing people increased. After a few more rounds like this, the situation would become even worse. Hearing Ren Zime's words, Ren Ziheng opened his eyes. His handsome face carried a grave and worried expression. I've recovered quite a bit, but there's still a certain distance before I can fully recover. In reality, with their current circumstances, it was utterly impossible for them to completely recover their origin energy. Ren Zime nodded. In her heart, she had a certain understanding of the situation. At this time, it was better for them not to say such words to destroy everyone's confidence. At this time, Ren Ziheng looked at the situation at the entrance of the cave and found that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were resisting the attacks of the skeletons. He took a closer look and found that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had a tacit understanding of each other. Moreover, the effect of this attack was not bad. He could not help but have a look of admiration in his eyes. Chapter 3455. Ren Ziheng nodded his head. Previously, there had been cultivators from the outer palace who had accidentally stumbled upon them. However, these outer palace disciples did not have sufficient strength and thought highly of themselves. Hence, they did not pay any attention to Ren Ziheng's advice. Under such circumstances, these outer palace disciples would often suffer the consequences of their own actions and lose their lives in the end. As senior brothers and sisters, the most they could do was give them some moral advice. However, if the other party was unwilling to pay attention to them, they would naturally not care. After all, their lives were their own. They had no obligation to protect the outer palace disciples. In comparison, they did not see any arrogance in Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. On the contrary, they were very humble. Just this point alone was enough to give them a good impression. Speaking of which, this time, the four of them had accidentally stumbled into this cave and helped us a lot. However, this is not good luck for them. Ren Ziheng shook his head and sighed. Although he had always said that they would definitely be able to hold on until tomorrow morning, judging from the current situation outside the cave, it was not very optimistic. Even he did not have enough confidence in their ability to hold on until the very last moment. He just cannot show it. The fellow who had tricked them is really a little abominable. If we can go back and help teach him a lesson, that would be good too. Rinzime raised her eyebrows. Up until now, she had not been able to help Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. If she could help them vent their anger, that would be good too. So, we must hold on until tomorrow morning. Ren Ziheng patted Ren Zime on the shoulder. Help me take good care of everyone. Ren Zime nodded. Leave the problem of these injured people to me. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three took turns attacking the skeletons that were constantly charging towards them. Under their battle prowess, the skeletons were destroyed very quickly. In front of their cave, densely packed skeletons had already fallen. However, the army of skeletons in the distance was still in groups and did not seem to have decreased in number. Looking at the scene before them, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others could not help but feel that the number of skeletons in the army was just too terrifying. No matter how many skeletons they had destroyed, the army of skeletons in the distance continued to gather. It was as if they would never be able to kill them all. Just looking at it was enough to make one feel exhausted. However, the moonlight was still bright. There was still a long time before dawn. Now, they could no longer hope for the dawn to come quickly. They could only hope that they could hold on for as long as possible. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three seemed to have reached a tacit understanding. They didn't spend any effort to use other martial skills. They just kept using the same one, almost numb. Bailey Hongzhuang sized up the skeletons in front of her. She was really curious as to why these skeletons had become like this and why they still had such combat strength. Along the way, she had also paid attention to the surrounding environment. However, this place was filled with pitch-black soil, and there were very few plants. Originally, according to his judgment, the source of the black gas that wanted to resolve the injuries caused by the skeletons should be these skeletons. Chapter 3456. There weren't any plants growing here, and there was nothing else on these skeletons other than their white bones and liveliness. Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't figure it out, no matter how hard she thought about it. Was there nothing that could suppress the black gas? According to her understanding, this shouldn't be possible. However, she didn't think too much about it. If it was so easy to discover, the doctors of the Hundred Flowers faction would have already found a way to deal with the black gas. Since there wasn't any progress after so long, it proved that this thing was indeed very difficult to find. At the very least, she probably wouldn't be able to find it in a short period of time. If they had the chance to come to the training grounds of the Inner Palace disciples in the future, perhaps she would be able to find a way to deal with it. Ren Ziheng and the others were ready to provide support after seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had held on for a while. However, when they noticed the situation of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, they couldn't help but be surprised. According to their judgment, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were only at the 5th level of the Purple Realm. There was a certain gap between their cultivation base and theirs. Logically speaking, it was already pretty good that they could hold on for so long. However, based on the current situation, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three still had some strength left and hadn't exhausted the Yuan Li in their bodies. Seeing this, Ren Ziheng and the others couldn't help but look at each other. It seems that we've underestimated the fighting strength of our juniors. Chu Jinfeng nodded. The Outer Palace disciples are getting stronger and stronger. If it were me at the 5th level of the Purple Realm, I wouldn't have been able to hold on for so long. Looking at their situation, they should be able to hold on for a while longer. You guys should hurry up and recover more Yuan Li. Renzime couldn't help but say. In this kind of race against time, every moment of perseverance was good. Ren Ziheng and Chu Jinfeng didn't waste any more time and immediately continued to use the spiritual stones to recover their Yuan Li. After a period of time, Ren Ziheng and Chu Jinfeng couldn't help but open their eyes. Both of them had some doubts in their hearts. It had been a while since this incident. According to their judgment, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three shouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. However, until now, they hadn't heard any news of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three wanting to change people. They couldn't help but open their eyes to see what was going on. When they saw this, they couldn't help but be even more surprised. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were still holding on and had no intention of backing down. Judging from the four's performance, Ren Ziheng and the others could see that they were not forcing themselves. Instead, they really had the ability to continue persevering. This made them gasp in amazement. One had to know that even if their cultivation was higher than Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, they could only hold on for so long. Some people couldn't even hold on for so long. However, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three who were only at the 5th level of the Purple Realm were able to hold on for so long. It was a little too special. At this moment, not only Ren Ziheng and Chu Jinfeng, but even Jing Tianlang and the others couldn't help but be attracted by Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. How did the four of them do it? Chu Jinfeng couldn't help but be stunned. He thought about it and didn't think that cultivators at the 5th level of the Purple Realm could hold on for so long. Chapter 3457. Renzime nodded and carefully observed the situation of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. Not bad. Their endurance seems to be stronger than ordinary cultivators. Not only that, if I'm not wrong, they should be strictly controlling the output of their primary power and conserving every bit of it. That's why they're able to achieve this, Jing Tianlang analyzed. He had been paying attention to Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three for a while. He noticed that every time they used their martial skills, their primary power output was basically the same, and the difference was extremely small. This was what shocked him the most. Just this control alone was not something that ordinary people could achieve. Even if his cultivation was stronger than Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest, he knew very well that in terms of control, he was definitely not as good as Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest. This kind of problem wasn't obvious on normal days, but when two cultivators of similar strength engaged in a white-hot battle, this difference would be reflected. If he asked himself honestly, if his cultivation was the same as Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, he would definitely be the loser in a life-or-death battle. This was because whether it was endurance or control, he could not compare to them. How they do it? Ren Zimei could not help but look at Jing Tianlang. She had rarely seen such a situation before. Ren Ziheng pondered and said, they should be specially trained in this aspect. Without this training, ordinary people would not be able to do this at all. However, he could not understand why Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had the time to train like this. Most cultivators only wanted to improve their cultivation and were not willing to spend time on such things. However, he had to admit that in certain special circumstances, endurance and control would play a huge role. While everyone was discussing Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's battle, they were still focused on dealing with the skeletons. In fact, the reason they had such endurance was entirely due to their experience in the oceanic world. Because they had been facing the attacks of demon beasts for a long time, their endurance was constantly increasing under such torture. Sometimes, even they themselves did not notice their own improvement. As for their control, it was also subtly improved in the process of the battle. In fact, they did not realize that they had improved in this aspect until they heard Ren Zixing and the rest conversation. The four of them could not help but look at each other in amazement. Hongzhuang, this is all thanks to you. If it wasn't for you, we probably wouldn't have improved so much. Shangguan Yingying's eyes lit up. She was pleasantly surprised by the quiet improvement. Now that she thought about it carefully, if it was her previous self, she would not have been able to last so long. Xiren was also shocked, but then he felt very happy. That's right. I didn't realize it myself. My control seems to be much stronger than before. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. Most of the time, this kind of subtle improvement was something that they said they couldn't find. When they found it, it proved that the improvement was not small. In that case, we've improved Hongzhuang. Chapter 3458. It seems that I shouldn't curse those monsters in the ocean world anymore. Without them, I wouldn't have improved so much. Shangguan Yingying's face had a hint of joy as she chuckled. After holding on for a while, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three retreated from the cave and were replaced by Ren Ziheng and the other two. At this time, many cultivators in the cave had their eyes on Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. Junior Sister Bailey, I didn't realize that your combat power was so strong. I underestimated you before? Ren Zimei smiled, but there was a flash of appreciation in the depths of her eyes. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three smiled faintly. Senior sister, you flatter us. Our cultivation is the weakest here. Ren Zimei waved her hand. You just came to Penglai Palace. This level of cultivation is very normal. Cultivation can be improved, but combat power is not so easy to improve. These were two completely different aspects. At least from the strength that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had shown, their combat power was definitely much stronger than ordinary 5th-level Purple Realm cultivators. The disciples of Penglai Palace all had their own strengths, but she was sure that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were stronger than the other disciples of Penglai Palace. But thinking of this, Ren Zimei also understood why Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were set up when they just came to Penglai Palace. It was because their performance was too outstanding. In such a competitive environment, no matter who performed too well, it was easy to be targeted collectively. But he also knew that as long as Bailey Hongzhuang could persevere in such a situation, their achievements would be far beyond other cultivators. Listening to Ren Zimei's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others' faces were filled with a faint smile, but they didn't say anything else. Senior sister, we're going to restore our primary power first, Bailey Hongzhuang said. In the previous battle, the primary power in their bodies had been exhausted. In this situation, it was undoubtedly very dangerous, so they had to restore their primary power as soon as possible. Renzime nodded. You guys should go. Thank you for your hard work. Then, the four of them sat on the ground in the cave and quickly took out spirit stones to recover their force. The power of the spirit stones quickly entered the bodies of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others through the circulation of the cultivation method, filling up their almost dried-up dantian. Among them, Di Beichun recovered his origin energy the fastest. The spirit stones in his hands quickly turned into powder. Immediately after, he took out 2 more spirit stones to recover his origin energy. Ever since he transformed into the physique of destiny, his affinity with origin energy had increased a lot. Whether it was his recovery speed or cultivation speed, it was far from what ordinary cultivators could compare to. Bailey Hongzhuang was second in terms of speed. That was because the heaven-defying mental cultivation technique was much stronger than ordinary cultivation techniques, and the circulation of her elemental energy was much faster. When Xiren and Shangguan Yingying's speed was about the same. The two of them also cultivated the top cultivation methods of the Shengxian continent, which allowed them to quickly recover their elemental energy. This was something they often used in the oceanic world. This was because none of them knew when they would face another wave of attacks. Because of the outstanding performance of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, everyone had been paying attention to them. Chapter 3459. Even if their cultivation was stronger than Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3, they could not compare with Di Beichun in terms of the speed of absorbing elemental energy, because the gap between them was too big. If it was Xiren and Shangguan Yingying's speed, everyone would not find it strange because their elemental energy absorption speed was not much different from theirs. However, Di Beichun's speed was a bit too heaven-defying. If the control and endurance shown by Di Beichun and the others before was not enough to make everyone envious, after all, it could only achieve unexpected results under some special circumstances. However, the speed of recovery now made everyone envious. The speed of elemental energy absorption meant the speed of the practitioner's cultivation. The faster the absorption speed, the faster the practitioner's strength would increase. Everyone looked at the unusually young faces of Di Beichun and the others and gradually understood in their hearts. It was no wonder that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 could reach such a cultivation at such a young age. They were definitely not ordinary people before. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to have such an outstanding performance. Ren Zimei and the others looked at each other. They already knew in their hearts that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3's identities were not simple. Being able to reach this step was enough to prove their means. Although everyone was very envious, no one said anything. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 gave everyone a very good impression. Although everyone was envious, they were not too jealous. In this Penglai Inner Palace, there were countless outstanding practitioners. It was not like they had never seen such abnormal geniuses before. Di Beichun's elemental energy recovery speed was extremely fast. With the help of the destined land's affinity with elemental energy, he did his best to recover his elemental energy. Time quietly passed by in this quiet atmosphere until a cry of surprise sounded out and completely broke the silence. Look! There's a lich there. An inner palace disciple could not help but exclaim, and his originally calm face became ugly almost immediately. As the disciple's voice fell, everyone who was cultivating could not help but open their eyes and stand at the entrance of the cave to observe the specific situation. It really is a lich. I didn't expect a lich to appear tonight. Oh my god, liches rarely appear. How can a lich appear in the outer region? Aren't we doomed? Damn it, Chu Jinfeng secretly snorted, and his handsome face quickly surged with a dignified look. Why is this lich here? Is this an activity specially organized by the skeleton army? Ren Ziheng's expression became extremely ugly. This was truly a case of one wave rising after another. They were already barely holding on against the continuous attacks of the skeletons. They didn't know how long they could hold on. However, The appearance of the lich made things worse. How could this be? Rinzimei's face was filled with disbelief as her face gradually paled. If that's the case, wouldn't our situation be even worse? With such a huge commotion, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three exited their cultivation state one after another. They looked doubtfully at the group of people with solemn expressions. Chapter 3460. Di Beichen and the others looked at Ren Ziheng and the others. They only knew about the skeleton army and the skeleton generals, but they had never heard of the lich. However, at this moment, just by looking at the ugly expression on everyone's face, they knew that the lich was definitely not something easy to deal with. The lich and the skeleton army are all skeletons, but their fighting strength is somewhat different. The lich's fighting strength can't even be compared to the skeletons, but every time they appear, they will bring us a lot of trouble. Because the lich can chant, once they chant, the strength of the skeletons will increase. In this way, we will have to use more strength to deal with the skeletons. Based on our current situation, just dealing with these ordinary skeletons is already not easy. If the skeleton's strength increases, I'm afraid we won't be able to last until tomorrow morning. Rinzimei said in a deep voice. Their situation was already not optimistic, and they didn't expect this to happen. It seems that these guys were prepared to leave their lives here. Listening to Rinzimei's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others had a better understanding of the lich. Looking at the direction where everyone pointed, they discovered the uniqueness of the lich. The lich stood in the middle of the skeleton army and didn't seem to have the slightest intention of attacking. He just stood there motionlessly and wore a layer of cloak on his body. However, the cloak was also somewhat shabby and emitted a foul smell. Are these lich staying in the middle of the skeleton army to be protected? Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but ask after observing the situation of the lich. Run Zimei nodded. The strength of these lich is very weak. If they directly face us, they will die. However, every time the lich appears in the middle of the skeleton army, they won't come out to attack at all. This is the most troublesome part. Once the lich appears, it means that the skeleton army will attack in a large scale. If there is only 1 or 2 holes, the lich won't appear at all. It seems that our situation tonight is really bad. At the end, Renzime couldn't help but sigh. This situation really made her feel like the heavens wanted to kill her. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others looked at each other in dismay. They didn't think that the skeleton army would have such a different situation. This degree of difficulty was simply unimaginable. Just as everyone was discussing, a low chanting sound rang out. In this silent night, there was a hint of desolation and sorrow. However, after this sound rang out, the spirit fire in the skeleton's eyes became brighter. At the same time, the disciples who were in charge of defending the skeleton army suddenly felt the pressure. Damn it, the lich has already started chanting. Chu Jinfeng's words, the liches, the skeleton's a level, the spirit's strengths, our spirit's energy consumption will increase. One of you come and help us. The cultivators at the entrance of the cave could not help but shout. Chapter 3461. However, this calm situation did not last long before it was once again broken by a heavy voice. No, if this continues, we won't be able to hold on. Jing Tonlang, who was guarding the cave entrance, couldn't help but say, now there are a total of 4 liches. The strength of the skeletons has increased again. Our spirit energy consumption is too fast. If we don't deal with these liches, I'm afraid we will die. Hearing Jing Tianlong's words, everyone opened their eyes and looked at the situation outside the cave. In their line of sight, they saw the 4 liches standing in the middle of the skeleton army, chanting in a low voice. When the attacking skeletons heard the chanting, it was as if they were injected with chicken blood. Whether it was the attack speed or strength, it was much higher than before. Didn't there only 2 liches before? Why are there 2 more now? Rinzime couldn't help but be surprised. When 2 liches appeared, she already felt that the situation was very bad. She didn't expect 2 more liches to appear now. Bailey Hongzhuang walked to Runzime's side. Her beautiful face revealed a trace of surprise. Senior Sister Ren, could it be that the strength of the skeletons will increase with the number of liches? Runzime nodded. Her eyes revealed an unprecedented seriousness. The chanting power of the liches can be stacked. The more liches appear, the more the attack power of the skeletons will increase. This situation, even if I have been training here for a long time, is the first time I have encountered such a situation. Now we can only continuously use martial arts to block the attacks of the skeletons. There is no time to rest in between. However, our spirit energy is already not at its peak state, and we need to continuously use martial arts. The speed of everyone's rotation will be greatly increased, and the time to recover spirit energy will become shorter and shorter. We can't go on like this. Runzime anxiously stomped her foot. Her eyes couldn't help but turn to Runziheng. Big brother, what should we do now? The previous method couldn't be continued. If they didn't think of another way, sooner or later they would be drowned by the skeleton army. Runziheng's eyes flickered with thoughts. Since that's the case, I'm afraid we can only think of a way to deal with these liches. Otherwise, with our current situation, we won't be able to hold on. After hearing Runziheng's words, everyone's expression couldn't help but change. Dealing with the liches was indeed the best method. However, these liches were in the center of the skeleton army, so it wouldn't be easy for them to deal with them. Jing Tianlang, Chu Jinfeng, what do you think? Runziheng asked. Jing Tianlang and Chu Jinfeng were also very stern. They looked at each other and nodded. That's the only thing we can do for now. According to the location of these liches, we can only force our way through, Runziheng said in a deep voice. Then, he looked at the crowd with a solemn gaze. This is the only way now. Is everyone willing to fight a bloody path with us? Chapter 3462. Di Beichen and Wenziren looked at each other and said, "We'll join as well." In the group of inner palace disciples, there were many injured cultivators. Although the two of them were slightly weaker than the others, at least they were not injured. The combat power they could unleash was not any weaker than the others. Seeing that Di Beichen and Wenziren were about to join the group, Bailey Hongzhuang and Shangwan Yingying looked at each other. The two of them were about to join the group, but they were stopped by Di Beichen and Wenziren. "It's too dangerous to go out now. Ziren and I will go out. The two of you stay here and help guard the cave." Di Beichen looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with concern. Under such circumstances, it would be inappropriate for him and Wenziren to not stand out as men. However, there was no need for Bailey Hongzhuang and Shangwan Yingying to go out. It was impossible for all of them to go out. Some of them had to stay behind to guard the cave. Therefore, it was best for Bailey Hongzhuang and Shangwan Yingying to stay here. At least for a short period of time, the cave was much safer than the outside. When Runziheng and the others heard that Di Beichen and Wenziren were about to join the group, they could not help but have a look of admiration in their eyes. They knew very well that once they left the cave at this time, they could lose their lives at any time. Now that they were ready to go out, they were already prepared to die. Junior D is right. Junior sister Bailey, junior sister Shangwan, you two should stay in the cave. We need more people inside. Runzime could not help but say. She understood what Di Beichen and Shangwan Yingying were thinking. During this period of time, she had already known that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were two perfect couples. Di Beichen and Wenziren had decided to go out in order to help Bailey Hongzhuang and Shangwan Yingying gain a chance to survive. At this moment, she couldn't help but admire Di Beichen. At least they were real men. Runziheng nodded. You guys stay in the cave. We will do our best to kill the lich. Beichen, be careful. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Di Beichen worriedly. If the four of them were together, she could still guarantee their safety. However, if Di Beichen and Ziren left, the situation would become much more complicated. However, under such circumstances, she also understood Di Beichen's thoughts. She could not reject him. Di Beichen nodded and looked at Bailey Hongzhuang affectionately. Don't worry, I will definitely come back safe and sound. You must keep your promise. Bailey Hongzhuang emphasized. Definitely. Shangwan Yingying also looked at Ziren worriedly. Ziren, you have to be careful too. These skeletons are not easy to deal with. Don't worry, I understand. After Runziheng and the others made the decision to kill the lich, everyone quickly got into formation. The original team, immediately split into two. Half of them stayed in the cave to continue guarding, while the other half went out to kill a bloody path. Their target was the Lich. "Big brother, after you guys go out, you have to speed up. There are not enough people in the cave. I'm afraid we won't be able to hold on for long." Shangguan Yingying couldn't help but remind. Chapter 3463. In the next second, Ren Ziheng turned to Di Beichun and the rest and said, "Everyone, let's set off once you're ready. Let's go." Everyone said without hesitation. Immediately after, Ren Ziheng led the group out of the cave and used their martial arts to attack the Lich along the way. The group of skeletons became even more agitated when they saw Ren Ziheng and the rest rushing out. They attacked them crazily and chaotically. Ren Ziheng was also very ferocious. The moment he used his martial arts skills, he cleared the skeletons in front of him. His goal was very simple. He just needed to get rid of the Lich in the distance. The Lich was about 1,000 meters away from everyone. If it was under normal circumstances, 1,000 meters would be covered in the blink of an eye. However, under the current situation, 1,000 meters was extremely slow. Just moving 10 meters forward took a lot of effort. This was because the speed of the skeletons was simply too fast. Most importantly, everyone had a limited amount of elemental energy in their bodies. They couldn't use their elemental energy without restraint. If they couldn't reach the Lich, their elemental energy would be depleted, and they could only die here. The Lich is really annoying. It's because of the existence of these Lich that the skeleton's strength has increased a lot. It's really troublesome to deal with them. Chu Jinfeng cursed the Lich as he cleared the skeletons around him. He hated the Lich the most. It clearly didn't have much fighting power, but could make a huge impact on the battle. Every time a Lich appeared, it was enough to give everyone a headache. Today's situation was undoubtedly the most troublesome one. We have to rush over quickly. If the Lich starts to retreat, we'll be in real trouble, Ren Ziheng said in a deep voice. In their team, he, Jing Tianlang, and Chu Jinfeng were the strongest. It was a pity that Chu Jinfeng's leg was severely injured and couldn't fight alongside them. He could only stay in the cave to command the situation. Chu Jinfeng nodded. His handsome face was dyed with a touch of seriousness. He said to everyone behind him, "Let's try to speed up and think of a way to rush over as soon as possible." "All right." Bailey Hongzhuang and Shangguan Yingying stood at the entrance of the cave, paying attention to the situation of the small team rushing out. Under such circumstances, the two of them were unable to calm down and recover their elemental energy. If Di Beichun and Shangguan Yingying were to encounter any danger, they would definitely not be able to bear the consequences. Xiren and the others aren't moving very fast. These skeletons are too strong. It's going to be very difficult for them to kill their way out. Shangguan Yingying furrowed her brows. She could only see the radiance of the martial skill being constantly displayed. However, the speed at which they were advancing was not fast enough. When she thought of the consumption of origin power, she could not help but feel apprehensive. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly as a complicated light flashed in her eyes. Indeed, according to this situation, I'm afraid that it will take at least 15 minutes to break through. However, with their Yuan Qi, even if they kill the Lich, it will be difficult for them to rush back. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Jing Tianlang looked at her in surprise, because Bailey Hongzhuang's judgment was exactly the same as his. The real situation might be even worse, Jing Tianlang said in a low voice. Chapter 3464. You're not wrong, but you don't know enough about the Lich's special traits, Jing Tianlang said slowly. Once the Liches notice that someone is approaching and attacking them, their chanting will increase. This means that Ren Ziheng and the rest will have to endure even more damage. As soon as these words came out, Bailey Hongzhuang and Shangguan Yingying's faces couldn't help but change. They really didn't know that the Lich had such characteristics. As a result, the pressure on Di Beichun and the others would inevitably increase. If this goes on, won't it be very difficult for them to kill the Liches? Shangguan Yingying's face was filled with confusion. In fact, it wasn't difficult at all. It was simply impossible. This was because they had too few people. If they had enough people, they might still have a chance to kill the liches. However, with such a long distance and the liches' superimposed strength, it would be very difficult for them to reach the liches. Jing Tianmon's expression was solemn and helpless, but we don't have any other choice. This is the only way we could try. As long as we can kill the liches, we might be able to hold on until dawn. The night seemed to pass very slowly. Everyone felt that a long time had passed, but in reality, only half of the night had passed. There were still a few hours left, and it was easier said than done to hold on. Bailey Hongzhuang's heart gradually sank. She understood from Jing Tianlong's words that Di Beiqin and the rest were basically sending themselves to their deaths. Even if they were to explode with shocking combat strength, they would only be able to kill the liches at most. It would be impossible for them to return. Therefore, long before Ren Ziheng and the rest set off, they were already prepared to die. Perhaps they were already used to such tragic scenes. Death was unavoidable at such a time, and the only thing they could do was to minimize the death rate as much as possible. Ren Ziheng and the rest could accept all of this calmly, but it didn't mean that Bailey Hongzhuang could accept all of this. She definitely couldn't accept that Di Beiqin was in any danger. If Di Beiqin didn't make it back, she couldn't accept the result. Di Beiqin and the rest tried their best to move forward. The surrounding skeletons' attacks were very strong, and everyone had to split up to attack. Even with Ren Ziheng and the rest opening a path in front, the surrounding skeletons were still constantly closing in, making them extremely helpless. However, under such circumstances, everyone gradually approached the lich's location. However, just as everyone was getting closer and closer to the lich's location, the lich's chanting suddenly became louder. Hearing this loud sound, Di Beiqin couldn't help but frown. Just hearing this sound made him extremely uncomfortable. Immediately, Di Beiqin discovered the surrounding skeletons' attack power. What's going on? These skeletons have become stronger again. Xiren's expression changed. Originally, these skeletons' strength was only at the 3rd level of the Purple Realm. After increasing their strength, they had reached the 4th level of the Purple Realm. Now, their strength had reached the 5th level of the Purple Realm. Previously, he could use a wave of martial arts to defeat these skeletons, but now that the skeleton's strength had reached the same level as him, it was much more difficult to deal with them. Chapter 3465. The closer we get to the lich, the stronger its chanting will become. So we need to get rid of these lich as soon as possible. Otherwise, it'll be even more troublesome. Ren Ziheng heard the conversation between Xiren and Wen Jinfeng. Chu Jinfeng frowned. We're still 400 meters away from the lich, but these skeletons have already realized what we're trying to do. They're surrounding the lich to protect him. We can't go on like this. These skeletons are so strong that it'll be difficult for us to break through. That's right. I don't have enough elemental energy in my body to deal with these Purple Realm 5th level skeletons. Even if I use it once, it won't be enough to kill them. It'll be difficult to push forward. As the skeleton's strength increased, everyone began to feel the difficulty of pushing forward. Every few steps forward became extremely difficult, and their elemental energy consumption increased. If this continued, there were only 2 possibilities left. One was that they'd successfully reached the lich and killed it, but they'd already lost the strength to go back. The other was that they'd go back now and could temporarily preserve their lives. But in the end, they could only wait for death in the cave. No matter which scenario it was, no one wanted to see it happen. Not good. These skeletons' strength has increased. Big Brother and the others are in trouble. Ren Zimei had been observing the situation outside the cave entrance. When she saw the group slow down, her face couldn't help but turn ugly. That's right. These skeletons' strength has increased to Purple Realm 5th level. Let's not even talk about them moving forward. Just stopping these skeletons from getting closer is already very difficult. The cultivator guarding the cave entrance said with a gloomy face. Ren Zimei anxiously paced back and forth. This can't go on. If we can't get rid of these lich, we'll all die here sooner or later. Even though everyone knew that there was a possibility of dying at any time after coming to this training ground, they still found it hard to accept when this scene really happened. Hong Zhuang, what should we do? Shangguan Yingying's face was filled with anxiety. If this goes on, will Xiren and the others not be able to come back? Thinking of this possibility, Shangguan Yingying's pretty face turned pale. She couldn't accept this possibility. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes flashed with a complicated light. Thousands of thoughts were running through her mind. This situation could not continue to develop like this. Otherwise, everyone would be finished. In the next second, Bailey Hongzhuang sat on the ground at the entrance of the cave. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's sudden actions, Ren Zimei and the others were all puzzled. They didn't know what Bailey Hongzhuang was planning to do. Bailey Hongzhuang quietly took out a zither and placed it on her knees. To everyone's surprise, she began to play. Bailey Hongzhuang's melodious music poured out from between her fingers, easing the originally tense atmosphere a little. However, everyone still looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in confusion, not knowing what she was trying to do. However, very soon, everyone understood why Bailey Hongzhuang was doing this. It was because they realized that the zither music contained the fluctuation of elemental energy. Chapter 3466. The sound of the zither was Bailey Hongzhuang's only area of effect attack. Poison was no longer effective against these skeletons who had long since died, so Bailey Hongzhuang was left with only this one large area of effect attack. Regardless of the outcome, Bailey Hongzhuang could only give it her all and give it a try. She does not usually use this technique very often because she does not have many opportunities to engage in group battles. Furthermore, using the musical assassination technique consumes her yuan power very quickly, so she needs to conserve some energy to protect herself. However, in the current situation, she does not need to worry about her own safety. She only needs to focus on getting rid of these obstructing skeletons. As Bailey Hongzhuang's zither music filled the air, Di Beichen and the others who were fighting against the skeletons could not help but turn around to take a look. When they saw Bailey Hongzhuang playing the zither, a gentle light flashed across Di Beichen's eyes. He understood that Bailey Hongzhuang was worried about him. The current situation was indeed extremely disadvantageous for them, but they have not lost hope yet. As long as it is not the last moment, they will not give up. The attack power of Bailey Hongzhuang's zither music had clearly exceeded everyone's expectations. The cultivators who were initially standing at the entrance of the cave to stop the skeletons from approaching could only watch as Bailey Hongzhuang's zither music continued to play. Layers upon layers of invisible sound waves immediately blocked off the skeleton army. Even though they were advancing dauntlessly, the semicircular arc was like a barrier which prevented them from getting any closer. Seeing this, they could not help but stop their attacks. Even if the three of them were to join forces, the effect might not be as good as Bailey Hongzhuang's. I never thought that junior sister Bailey would know this technique, and the effect would be so good. Ren Zi's beautiful eyes lit up. She had heard of this zither music technique before, but very few people know how to use it. Up until now, this was the first time she had seen someone use it with her own eyes. However, looking at the effect now, she had to admit that the effect was really excellent. The combat power of one person was enough to fight against 4 cultivators. This was a little too shocking. Jing Tianling also had a look of amazement on his face. The 4 new junior brothers and sisters had given them quite a surprise. In this situation, even they were helpless. They didn't expect Bailey Hongzhuang to have such a trick up her sleeve. The worry in Shangguan Yingying's eyes did not fade away. She did not know why Hongzhuang was doing this. In fact, the cultivators in the cave were completely capable of stopping the attacks of these skeletons. The ones who were in real trouble were Xiren's team. However, Shangguan Yingying soon understood why Bailey Hongzhuang did that. This was because she realized that Bailey Hongzhuang's zither music attack had gradually changed from an arc to a straight-line attack. This straight-line attack was clearly aimed at the skeletons surrounding Di Beichen's team. Bailey Hongzhuang steadied her mind and tried her best to control the direction of her zither music attack. Currently, she could only use He Yang's method to help Di Beichen's team. Only by reducing the pressure on them would they be able to reach the Lich faster and complete their mission of killing the Lich. Chapter 3467. Heavens, the attacks of this musical technique can change directions at will. Isn't that a little too shocking? I've never seen anyone use musical techniques before, but I've heard that they're extremely special. Now that I've seen it today, the range of damage is truly shocking. Based on that, Junior Sister Bailey's attainments in musical techniques should be extremely impressive. Otherwise, it would be impossible for her to reach such a level. Everyone stared at Bailey Hongzhuang in surprise. As disciples of the Inner Palace, they had seen quite a bit of the world and had heard of various strange techniques. However, Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4 had surprised them time and time again. They could not help but sigh in admiration. Di Beichin and the others constantly dealt with the skeletons in the surroundings, but to their surprise, they discovered that the pressure on them had suddenly lessened for some reason. The skeletons in the surroundings were actually unable to get close to them. Everyone could not help but be stunned when they saw this. They had no idea what was going on. What's wrong with these skeletons? Chu Jinfeng's eyes flickered with surprise. Earlier, he had felt that the skeletons were extraordinarily difficult to deal with. Why did it become so much easier in just a short while? Ren Ziheng looked back in Bailey Hongzhuang's direction in deep thought. He said, "Could it be Junior Sister Bailey? It's Hongzhuang's musical techniques that have helped us block the attacks of the skeletons. Let's use this opportunity to advance quickly. It'll be even more difficult if we miss this opportunity," Di Beichin said. He understood that Bailey Hongzhuang had used this method because she was worried about them. She wanted to help them reach the location of the Lich as soon as possible. However, he also knew that due to the large range of the musical techniques, Yuan energy would be depleted very quickly. It could not be maintained for too long, so they had to race against time. The eyes of all the Inner Palace disciples present lit up when they found out that Bailey Hongzhuang's help was the reason for the turn of events. They felt gratitude towards Bailey Hongzhuang. Originally, they had almost no hope of returning alive. However, Bailey Hongzhuang's actions had undoubtedly given them a glimmer of hope. Then let's move forward at full speed. Ren Ziheng immediately made a decision after understanding everything. Let's kill our way out. As Ren Ziheng's voice fell, everyone rushed forward without hesitation as if they had been injected with chicken blood. The current situation was the best they could hope for. If they didn't take advantage of this opportunity to deal with the Lich, they wouldn't be able to return alive. As the group moved forward, they unexpectedly discovered another thing. This was because they realized that the attack power of these skeletons had actually weakened a little. Originally, under the amplification of the Lich's chant, the skeleton's combat strength had already risen to the 5th level of the Purple Realm, which was very difficult for them to deal with. But now, these skeletons' combat strength had actually decreased to the 4th level of the Purple Realm, which surprised everyone. The chanting power of these Lich's chant has clearly not weakened. On the contrary, it's constantly increasing. Why is the strength of these skeletons decreasing? Chu Jinfeng's eyes were filled with doubt. The situation that had happened today was really strange. It was hard for him to understand. Chapter 3468. Although Liches didn't appear often, it wasn't like they hadn't seen them before. Hence, they had a certain understanding of the characteristics of Liches. The Liches had never had any effect on the skeleton's strength. However, it was really strange that the skeleton's strength had suddenly decreased. It was a situation that they had never encountered before. However, under such circumstances, they didn't have the time to think about it in detail. All they wanted to do was to get rid of the Liches as soon as possible. Xiao He and Xiao Bai sat on Bailey Hongzhuang's shoulder and watched the small team ahead worriedly. They're getting closer to where the Liches are. However, those skeletons are also protecting the Liches with their lives. It's going to be another huge battle. Black's face was filled with worry. Tonight's situation could be said to be a frightening night. It was as if all of their escape routes were sealed. But these Liches are really interesting. They don't seem to have any intention of leaving. Are they going to stay there forever? Xiao Bai couldn't understand. He had never seen something like this before, so he really didn't understand the characteristics of it all. I think both the Liches and the skeletons are inanimate objects. Naturally, they wouldn't have high intelligence. It's not a bad thing for them to be willing to be targets. At this moment, Jing Tianlang and the others who had been paying attention to the situation outside also discovered the changes in the skeleton's strength. The skeleton's strength has decreased, so everyone is moving faster. Jing Tianlang said as he shifted his gaze to Bailey Hongzhuang. From the beginning to the end, the others and the liches didn't change at all. However, the skeleton's strength suddenly decreased. After thinking about it, there was only one reason left: Bailey Hongzhuang. He quickly figured it out. It must be that Bailey Hongzhuang's music and the liches chanting were both sonic attacks. There was an effect of the two of them canceling each other out. That was why this happened. This was undoubtedly a huge discovery. In the past, he didn't know any other way to deal with a lich's chanting apart from killing it. Now, Bailey Hongzhuang had given him the answer. If there were a few cultivators in their team who knew how to play the zither, wouldn't that mean that they could cancel out the lich's buff and fight for a better situation for everyone? Bailey Hongzhuang's performance today had truly opened a new door for everyone. It wasn't that the liches couldn't be redeemed, it was just that they hadn't found a way to do so before. Under such circumstances, Di Beichin and the others pushed their strength to the limit and finally succeeded in approaching the lich. Seeing this scene, the eyes of the cultivators in the cave could not help but flash with intense excitement. Whether or not they could survive the night depended on whether the lich could be taken care of. As long as the lich was taken care of, they would still have a chance of survival. Bailey Hongzhuang's charming face gradually turned pale. Although she hadn't been using her music for a long time, she didn't conserve any of her elemental energy. She didn't hold back at all and used all her elemental energy without holding back. There were simply too many skeletons. In order to ensure that she could be of the greatest help to the team, her elemental energy was gradually reaching its limit. Chapter 3469. Upon hearing Xiao Hei's words, Shangguan Yingying finally noticed the change in Bailey Hongzhuang's expression. A look of worry immediately surfaced in her eyes. "Hongzhuang, how are you feeling?" Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head. She immediately took out a few pills to recover her yuan energy and swallowed them. She said, "I can only hold on for as long as I can. The rate at which my yuan energy is being consumed is simply too fast." The more skeletons she faced, the faster her yuan energy would be consumed. She knew very well that she would not be able to hold on for long under such circumstances. However, she could only try her best to hold on under such circumstances. After all, the longer she held on, the greater the chance of everyone surviving. Renzime and the others also noticed the situation after hearing the conversation between Shangguan Yingying and Bailey Hongzhuang. They could not help but feel worried. It was because of Bailey Hongzhuang's zither technique that they were able to turn the situation around. If Bailey Hongzhuang could not hold on any longer, wouldn't the situation become even worse? What should we do? Renzime could not help but look at Jing Tianlang. They could not let the situation return to how it was in the beginning. Jing Tianlang muttered to himself for a moment. His gaze then landed on the inner palace disciples who could not fight due to their injuries. "Everyone, quickly channel your yuan energy into Junior Sister Bailey's body. Help her hold on." In the next second, Jing Tianlang looked at Bailey Hongzhuang. "Junior Sister Bailey, when everyone channels their yuan energy into your body, don't resist. There shouldn't be any problems. What do you think?" Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Jing Tianlang with a complicated gaze. This method could be said to be a huge test for the recipient. If someone did not have good intentions when channeling their yuan energy into her body, there was a possibility that she would be severely injured. Therefore, although this method could be used, almost no one would choose to take such a risk on a normal day. Renzime could not help but frown when she heard Jing Tianlang's suggestion. This method is too dangerous for Junior Sister Bailey. Currently, there's no other way except for this method, Jing Tianlang emphasized. He then looked at the people behind. "This is the only way for us to survive. I hope that everyone can work together to help the team in front kill the liches. No matter who has bad intentions, the only outcome is that we will all die here. I believe that everyone knows what to do." The expressions of the cultivators present turned serious. Then they all nodded. Now that they were all in the same boat, they were all in the same boat. If there was even the slightest problem, they would be wiped out. Shangguan Yingying's brows furrowed. No, this method is too risky. What if someone has bad intentions? Wouldn't Hong Zhuang's life? She would be in dangers in the end. If this method was used by a trustworthy person, she wouldn't feel anything. But now, they were just friends who had only been together for a short period of 10 days. It was far from the level of trust. Wasn't this taking Bailey Hongzhuang's life as a joke? Chapter 3470. Jing Tianlong's face flashed with coldness and seriousness. Now that everyone's lives are hanging in the balance, there's no other way. If everyone dies, do you have any other way to survive? I don't agree with that either. Shangguan Yingying was a little angry. It's easy for you to say that. The one who's taking the risk is Hong Zhuang, not you. Of course you're speaking with such a strong sense of righteousness. Shangguan Yingying's impression of Jing Tianlang was only SOSO. Now that she saw Jing Tianlang letting Bailey Hongzhuang take such a risk for everyone's survival, she couldn't help but feel disgusted. This kind of guy on the surface seemed to care about the big picture, but in fact he was letting others take the risk. Di Beichen and Ziren were already in danger outside, and now he was letting Hong Zhuang take the risk. She had to protect Hong Zhuang when Di Beichen wasn't around. Seeing Shangguan Yingying so stubborn, Jing Tianlong's eyes became gloomy. Do you know what the situation is? What does it have to do with you whether I know what the situation is? I'd rather die here than let Hong Zhuang take the risk. So what? Shangguan Yingying's face was cold. This kind of threat had no effect on her. Others thought that they were dead for sure, but she knew very well that with the existence of the Chaos Ring, they still had a chance to survive. In this situation, they didn't need to take the risk at all. If Bailey Hongzhuang was in danger, then she wouldn't be able to answer to Di Beichen and Ziren. You're an unreasonable woman. Jing Tianlong's face was livid. He looked at Shangguan Yingying angrily. He felt that this woman didn't have any sense of the big picture. In this situation, she should have put aside her own life and death, but Shangguan Yingying was still here. It was ridiculous. Seeing Jing Tianlang and Shangguan Yingying quarreling with each other, Ren Zimei couldn't help but say, "Stop quarreling. The situation is indeed very dangerous, but there's no point in arguing like this." Jing Tianlang and Shangguan Yingying glanced at each other coldly when they heard this. Only then did they withdraw their gazes. It was obvious that they could not be bothered to waste their breath on each other. Bailey Hongzhuang played her zither as she listened to the conversation between Shangguan Yingying and Jing Tianlang. She had mixed feelings. She knew that Shangguan Yingying was protecting her because she was worried that she would be in danger. However, in this situation, there was no other way. She couldn't tell if Jing Tianlang was doing this out of a sense of righteousness or selfishness. None of that mattered now. The only thing she needed to think about was whether everyone was trustworthy. If she took such a risk, once there was a crisis, the consequences would be irreversible. Could she really leave her back to these people? Junior Sister Bailey, I want to assure you that I have no intention of harming you. If I do, may I be struck by lightning and die a horrible death. Ren Zimei looked seriously at Bailey Hongzhuang. Whether it's my brother or junior brother D, they're all in a very dangerous situation. Without your help, they won't be able to make it back even if they kill the Lich. Chapter 3471. Ren Zimei's eyes shone with sincerity. She and Ren Ziheng had always depended on each other for survival. She really didn't want anything to happen to him. She didn't have any ill intentions towards Bailey Hongzhuang. Although she knew that Bailey Hongzhuang was the one who had to bear the risk, and not her, she really couldn't think of any other way at this moment. Shangguan Yingying frowned. Almost all the pressure was on Bailey Hongzhuang now. This made her very unhappy. Even though she knew in her heart that this was indeed the best solution, it was better to be safe than sorry. Everyone's eyes fell on Bailey Hongzhuang and Ren Zimei. They didn't know what decision Bailey Hongzhuang would make. Jing Tianlang also looked at Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang's decision would undoubtedly affect the overall situation. Bailey Hongzhuang saw the sincerity and seriousness in Ren Zimei's eyes. Many thoughts flashed through her mind. After thinking for a moment, she nodded and said, "Okay." Now that they were grasshoppers on the same rope, no matter who got into trouble, it wouldn't be good for them. Agreeing to run Zime's plan was indeed a little risky, but if it succeeded, it would be a friendship. Rinzime was pleasantly surprised when she saw that Bailey Hongzhuang had agreed. Although she said it sincerely, she was still worried that Bailey Hongzhuang would reject. In fact, most people would choose to reject this kind of thing instead of accepting it. "Thank you, Junior Bailey." Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head and said, "We are all doing this for the people we care about." Rinzime's eyes couldn't help but be filled with admiration when she heard Bailey Hongzhuang's words. She and Bailey Hongzhuang were now on the same side. In the next moment, Rinzime turned to the cultivators and said, "Helping the team kill the Lich is the only way for us to survive. However, we can't let junior sister Bailey bear the risk alone. So, why don't we all share the risk? If there really is a problem, we will be able to immediately determine who is behind it. No matter who did it, we will take his life." Rinzime's expression instantly became serious. Her sharp and serious gaze swept over everyone, full of threat and dominance, not allowing a trace of resistance. This team was originally led by Ren Ziheng. Now that Ren Ziheng was not here, as Ren Ziheng's sister, she had to carry everyone. She absolutely could not allow any problems to occur here. Following Ren Zime's words, the cultivators present could not help but look at each other. Their expressions were tinged with a hint of seriousness. Ren Zime is right. Since we have to bear the risk, we can't let junior sister Bailey bear it alone. All of us have to join in to minimize the risk. If anyone has any disloyalty, the others will gang up on them. No matter who has any private conflicts at this moment, everyone should let go. At this moment, the crippled cultivator who Bailey Hongzhuang had helped to treat earlier spoke out. Seeing that someone had agreed with her suggestion, Renzime's face lit up with a satisfied smile. "That's right. What are we still thinking about? If we fail, all of us can only wait for death here. Instead of waiting for death here, why don't we give it our all?" Chapter 3472. Shangguan Yingying, who was originally very displeased, felt a little better after hearing Ren Zime's suggestion. At least Bailey Hongzhuang would not have to bear all the risks alone. Not only that, with this method, even if the other cultivators had any ill intentions, they would not dare to make a move. If they did, they would be discovered immediately, which was tantamount to suicide. This method seemed to make everyone bear a certain amount of risk, but in reality, it reduced the risk to the minimum. "That's more like it." Shangguan Yingying nodded. Her impression of Ren Zime improved a little. At least she could see that Ren Zime did not have any ill intentions. "This method is much better than what you came up with." Shangguan Yingying snorted coldly. She looked at Jing Tianlang with displeasure. Whenever she thought of Jing Tianlang's arbitrary attitude, she felt a wave of displeasure. Seeing Shangguan Yingying's reaction, Jing Tianlang's face showed a hint of displeasure, but he was too lazy to say anything. "Since everyone agrees, then let's do it this way. I will stand behind junior sister Bailey. Everyone, one by one, channel your origin energy into the body of the cultivator in front of you, and help junior sister Bailey continue to perform the zither technique." Rinzime looked at the people behind her. Although they were seriously injured and could not fight, channeling their yuan qi was not a problem. Hearing this, everyone nodded and said, "Okay." In the next second, the cultivators were sitting down to recuperate began to move. One by one, they lined up. "Jing Tianlang, you and Junior Shangguan will be responsible for the situation outside. However, at a time like this, don't make a fuss. In the end, it won't be good for anyone." Rinzime looked at Jing Tianlang indifferently. At a time like this, she was too lazy to talk nonsense. In fact, she understood that Jing Tianlang was thinking of a solution for everyone. However, Shangguan Yingying was not wrong to think from Bailey Hongzhuang's perspective. Hearing the warning and dissatisfaction in Rinzime's voice, Jing Tianlang frowned and said, "I understand." Seeing this, Rinzime did not waste any more time and place her hands on Bailey Hongshuang's back. Junior sister Bailey, get ready. I'm going to start now. All right. Bailey Hongshuang nodded lightly and relaxed her body, not rejecting the influx of Ren Zimei's origin power. The essence energy in her body was indeed almost depleted. Even if she consumed medicinal pills, the replenishment speed was far from being able to keep up with the rate of depletion. If this continued, she would have no choice but to stop. Then, Ren Zimei's yuan qi flowed into Bailey Hongshuang's body through her hands, without encountering the slightest hindrance. After noticing this situation, Ren Zimei was relieved. As long as Bailey Hongshuang could control her body and not resist, it was a good thing. Following Ren Zimei's actions, the other cultivators in the cave did not waste any more time. They followed suit and began to transfer their essence force to the cultivators in front of them. Chapter 3473. When Ren Ziheng and the rest felt the effects of Bailey Hongshuang's musical technique gradually weakening, they understood that Bailey Hongshuang was unable to hold on any longer. The consumption of their primary energy from killing the skeletons was already extremely shocking. What's more, Bailey Hongshuang had single-handedly solved such a huge problem for them. Everyone could only brace themselves and try their best to get closer to the liches. They only had a slim chance of survival. Even if they couldn't make it back, they could at least kill as many as they could. However, as the pressure on everyone gradually increased, the effects of their musical technique suddenly returned to how it was before. It even showed signs of strengthening. Everyone couldn't help but feel puzzled. They couldn't understand how Bailey Hongshuang had managed to do this. Junior Brother D, your wife is really extraordinarily powerful. Chu Jinfeng exclaimed to Di Beichun as he killed the skeletons in front of him. Earlier on, when he found out that Bailey Hongshuang was a doctor, he was already full of admiration for her. This was because Bailey Hongshuang was not only outstanding in appearance, but she was also quite powerful. Moreover, she was also a doctor. Compared to ordinary cultivators, she was already much stronger. However, Bailey Hongshuang was actually able to use her musical technique. This was simply too shocking. So many of them had only managed to reach this stage. Bailey Hongshuang had actually solved such a huge problem for them with her own strength. How could they not be amazed? Following Chu Jinfeng's words, the other disciples in the group also nodded their heads in agreement. This method was truly impressive. Hearing Chu Jinfeng's praise, Di Beichun couldn't help but smile. He felt a wave of pride in his heart. My wife has always been very powerful. I'm also convinced. Ren Ziheng looked at the situation in front of him and said, let's think of a way to deal with these 4 liches one by one. While junior sister Bailey can still help us, let's end this quickly. As soon as he said that, all the cultivators in the group nodded. All right, let's end this quickly. Di Beichun and the others went all out. Previously, they had been somewhat restrained, but now, they could no longer care about the consequences. After all, if they could get rid of one more lich, the pressure they faced would lessen. If they could get rid of the 4 liches as soon as possible, they might still have a chance to survive. As Di Beichun and the others unleashed their full combat power, the speed at which the skeletons were being cleared also increased. When the lich discovered the actions of Di Beichun and the others, his chanting voice became sharper and sharper. Now that there were skeletons behind them, even if they wanted to escape, wouldn't be easy. Therefore, they could only chant like crazy to prevent Di Beichun and the others from getting close. When the skeletons heard the chanting, it was as if they had been injected with chicken blood. However, when the disciples of Penglai Palace heard the chanting, they only felt a headache. In the cave, Shangguan Yingying couldn't help but cover her ears. She frowned and said, this lich's voice is getting more and more ear-piercing. I feel uncomfortable in my body. This is what happens when a lich is in danger. Unless you kill him, his voice won't disappear. Chapter 3474. Bailey Hongshuang furrowed her brows when she heard the sound. Such an ear-piercing sound could make one's scalp go numb, as if it could directly pierce one's soul. Even though they had already used their elemental energy to cover Shuang, the extremely penetrating sound continued to drill into their ears. If it were an ordinary person, their body would probably explode under such a sharp and piercing sound. The power of the sound wave could not be seen or touched, but its influence was extremely terrifying. If they could feel such discomfort from such a distance, Di Beichen and the others who were fighting would definitely feel even more discomfort when faced with such a sound. In the next second, Bailey Hongzhuang's deep and dark phoenix eyes could not help but reveal a trace of sharpness. Ever since she had learned the art of zither music, she had not encountered many cultivators in this field. She did not expect that the first time she would compete with the other party in the art of zither music would be against a group of inanimate objects. Since it had already come to this point, then she would have a good fight with the other party and see who was stronger. Following that, Bailey Hongzhuang's zither music changed. The originally pleasant zither music suddenly became sharper. It was not as gentle as before, but was instead filled with sharpness and sternness. Feeling the change in the zither music, everyone could not help but look at Bailey Hongzhuang in astonishment. They did not know if there was any special reason for her sudden change in the zither music. However, everyone quickly understood the reason behind the change in the situation. This was because, following the change in the zither music, they suddenly realized that the sound that made them feel extremely uncomfortable had gradually weakened. Furthermore, they clearly noticed that the lich was still singing with all his might, and there was no sign of it weakening at all. As such, there was no other possibility other than Bailey Hongzhuang's zither music that could cause such a change. Shangguan Yingying's eyes lit up. She could not help but exclaim in her heart. She did not know that Bailey Hongzhuang's zither music was actually so powerful, and that she could even use such a method. Jing Tianlang also looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in astonishment. The effect of the zither music really surprised him. Just the effect from before was already very shocking. He did not expect the zither music to have other changes. Boom! Under Di Beichen's all-out attack, a lich died at his hands. Ren Ziheng and the others couldn't help but give Di Beichen a thumbs up when they saw how quickly he dealt with the lich. Originally, Di Beichen's strength was not the strongest in their team. Everyone was already very glad that they did not fall into any danger along the way. Who would have thought that Di Beichen would not only not be a burden to the team, but on the contrary, the fighting strength that he displayed was simply astonishing. Before this, no one had seen Di Beichen in action, so they weren't sure. But now that they had seen Di Beichen in action, they understood that Di Beichen definitely had the ability to fight above his level. If anyone underestimated Di Beichen because of his cultivation, they would definitely be the one to suffer in the end. Not only Di Beichen, but also Xiren's fighting strength was just as strong. This could not help but give Ren Ziheng and the others a misconception. It was as if these two disciples were not disciples of the outer palace, but disciples of the inner palace. This was because there was no sense of disharmony at all when they worked together. Chapter 3475. Listening to Chu Jinfeng's words, Di Beichen's lips curled into a smile as he said, "This is all thanks to everyone's cooperation. I was just lucky." Just like what he had heard, the lich's combat power was not very strong. It was just that the surrounding skeletons protecting the lich were very strong. Not only that, when he was about to launch a fatal attack on the lich, he was met with the lich's desperate counterattack. The sound was abnormally sharp and ear-piercing, which made him feel very uncomfortable. Seeing Di Beichen being so humble, Chu Jinfeng shook his head and smiled. "Junior brother Di, they're being too humble. Just from the fact that you were able to kill the lich, it already proves that your mental strength is not weak." Chu Jinfeng was very clear that if one's mental strength was not strong enough, it could very well damage one's mental strength. Therefore, even they had to be extra careful when dealing with the lich. Di Beichen's success had already exceeded their expectations. Ren Ziheng and the other cultivators also nodded. Generally speaking, this was not something that a first-time cultivator could do. Even they had to gradually understand the lich's characteristics before making a move. Did you guys notice that although the lich's chanting strength did not decrease, the influence on us has decreased by a lot? At this moment, a cultivator's astonished voice sounded. If it was any other day, just the sharp and ear-piercing sound when dealing with a lich would have given them a splitting headache. However, he clearly felt that the influence had decreased by a lot. Following this cultivator's words, everyone finally reacted. After thinking about it carefully, they realized that it was indeed the case. Instantly, their expressions became strange. That's right. If it was any other day, I wouldn't be able to accept being so close to the lich for so long. But now, it's actually able to persevere. It's really surprising. Di Baichen quietly turned to look at Bailey Hongzhuang, who was sitting at the entrance of the cave and playing the zither. The smile and pride in his eyes deepened. If I'm not wrong, this should be related to my wife's zither music. Her zither music has also become sharper. Once this was said, everyone was slightly stunned. Then, a look of understanding appeared on their faces. I was wondering why the music suddenly changed. So it's because of this. Chu Jinfeng's face was full of admiration. Previously, we were helpless against this lich. I didn't expect that there would be such a way to restrain it. It's really amazing. Ren Ziheng agreed. Indeed, if there was someone who could help us restrain the lich's influence, then our situation wouldn't be so bad. If we can return alive this time, we'll really have to thank junior sister Bailey. The cultivators present were overjoyed. They had joined this small team with the determination to die. They did not expect that they would still have a chance to live. Naturally, they were overjoyed. After one of the liches was slain, the other 3 liches felt a strong sense of danger. Immediately, they increased the intensity of their incantations. Meanwhile, the surrounding skeletons quickly surrounded the 3 liches to protect them, preventing Di Baichen and the others from breaking through their defensive line. However, while the liches were chanting with all their might, the influence of Bailey Hongzhuang's zither music was also increasing. After the 2 sound waves collided, they canceled each other out. Chapter 3476. Bailey Hongzhuang's 10 fingers fluttered in the air as the sound of the zither poured out from her hands. There was an endless stream of elemental energy flowing into her body from behind, supporting her to complete everything she wanted to do. Under such circumstances, she was not stingy with her elemental energy, so the effect was very good. In her line of sight, she noticed that Di Baichen had successfully killed a lich, and her eyes couldn't help but reveal a joyful smile. Even if she couldn't fight side by side with Di Baichen, she was still on the same side as Di Baichen. Master, the increase in strength of these skeletons has been suppressed, and the influence of those lich has also been suppressed. You are really amazing. Xiaohei stayed beside Bailey Hongzhuang. Her round and bright eyes were filled with excitement. Previously, everyone was clearly in a hopeless situation, but she didn't expect that because of her master's actions, there was a possibility of turning the situation around. It was really amazing. As long as we can hold on for a while, I believe that Di Baichen and the rest will be able to kill all the lich in return. Xiao Bai's eyes were fixed on Di Baichen and the rest who were fighting with the lich. Now that Di Baichen and the rest had started to deal with the second lich, she believed that it wouldn't take long for them to finish off the second lich. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded lightly. Fortunately, everyone is gathered together and has abundant elemental energy. Otherwise, I won't be able to do it alone. Originally, when Bailey Hongzhuang agreed to Ren Zimei's suggestion, she was a little uncertain in her heart, but after seeing that there were no problems until now, Bailey Hongzhuang was completely relieved. At this time, the most worried thing was the others. As long as everyone was willing to work together to overcome this crisis, there was still hope. Do your best, Hongzhuang. Shangguan Yingying looked at Bailey Hongzhuang excitedly. Your musical skills are the bane of liches. In the past, she also knew that Bailey Hongzhuang was good at music, but most of the time, using music was not as simple and straightforward as directly using it. Therefore, Bailey Hongzhuang did not use it much, and she did not think that it was very powerful. However, today's scene changed Shangguan Yingying's impression of him greatly. Under such circumstances, no one's moves were as good as Bailey Hongzhuang's zither technique. Facts had proven that no matter what kind of move it was, it had a very powerful effect. It was just that the effect was different because of the strange environment. Jing Tianlang looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and said, "It's all up to you now. I hope you can maximize the effects of your music." Bailey Hongzhuang glanced at Jing Tianlang indifferently. She did not have a good impression of Jing Tianlang's previous attitude, but she also knew that the reason he did this was to ensure everyone's safe return. "I will do my best," Bailey Hongzhuang responded. Hearing this, Jing Tianlang's eyes changed slightly, but he did not say anything and turned to look at the front again. In fact, all of this did not take very long, but under such a depressing situation, it felt like time passed abnormally slowly. Chapter 3477. A cool breeze blew, and in this dark and quiet environment, there was a trace of a sweet and fishy smell. It blew away Bailey Hongzhuang's hair, faintly revealing her beautiful face. Her black hair was gloomy, and her white face was like a lotus flower emerging from the water, with an astonishing sense of beauty. A pair of pitch-black bright phoenix eyes flickered with specks of starlight, like resplendent pearls, and revealed a firm and domineering aura that made people sigh in their hearts. The sound of Bailey Hongzhuang's zither was constantly changing. Whether it was the Lich or the skeleton army, she still didn't have enough understanding. Therefore, she could only constantly use various zither techniques to judge what kind of effect it would have. Maybe after these methods, there would be a method that would have the best effect on the skeleton army and the Lich. After Bailey Hongzhuang's zither music gradually changed, everyone discovered that the influence of the Lich's chanting had returned to its original state, but the speed of the skeleton army had been suppressed and reduced by a little. Bailey Hongzhuang's clear eyes constantly gazed at everything in the distance, observing the changes of the skeleton army and the Lich. She discovered that the situation had indeed changed, and she couldn't help but be astonished. In the past, when she was learning zither music techniques, she also knew that different zither music would have different effects, but she didn't expect that it would be so miraculous when dealing with the skeleton army. If she could use it properly, it would be of great help to everyone. After understanding this point, Bailey Hongzhuang changed the zither music back to the second type. At least when everyone was dealing with a Lich, the second type of zither music would achieve the best results. Because after blocking the sharp chanting of the Lich, everyone's mind would be less shaken when killing the Lich. Under the help of Bailey Hongzhuang's zither music, the pressure on Ren Ziheng's team was undoubtedly reduced by a lot. Compared to the situation that everyone had expected, the current situation was much better. Although there were unavoidable injuries, at least no one died, and this was already the best situation. Bang, bang, bang. Di Beiqin and the others continued to display their martial skills, blasting the skeletons in front of the Lich into dust. Countless skeletons rushed towards them, but everyone had already formed a formation to help each other. Not only were they protecting themselves, they were also doing their best to protect their teammates. Shortly after, the space in front of them was cleared and the Lich was exposed to Ren Ziheng. Ren Ziheng's figure flashed as the essence force in his body surged out, attacking the Lich without hesitation. A strong gust of wind blew the Lich's cloak. When the hooded Lich saw Ren Ziheng approaching, its body kept retreating and its voice became sharper. However, he also realized that his chanting had been suppressed. He was unable to make the cultivator in front of him lose his ability to attack. Crack! The sound of bones breaking could be heard, and the Lich's chanting stopped abruptly. His cloak was torn apart, revealing his skeletal torso. Seeing that the second Lich had been dealt with, everyone's faces lit up with joy. They had completed half of the quest. Chapter 3478. If it was any other day, a team of 40 or so people would not be able to withstand their attacks. However, they had been attacking for so long without any results, which made the skeletons extremely angry. The Lich's sharp chanting stimulated the skeletons, and the army of skeletons began a new wave of attacks. Bailey Hongzhuang had become the main force in the cave. The injured practitioners were now channeling their yuan qi into Bailey Hongzhuang's body. If someone ran out of yuan qi, he would immediately retreat from Bailey Hongzhuang's back and recover his yuan qi on the other side. This was the only way they could continue to persevere. In the cave, Shangguan Yingying and Jing Tianlang cleaned up some of the surrounding skeletons from time to time. In order to help the team in front to the greatest extent, Bailey Hongzhuang's sound wave attack had changed into a straight line attack, and the attack at the cave entrance was fan-shaped, so it was inevitable that some of the skeletons would be missed. However, these skeletons were nothing to them, so the two of them dealt with them quickly. Not long after, the third lich was successfully dealt with, and everyone saw the hope of success. However, the team also paid a certain price when dealing with the third lich. There were simply too many skeletons around, and the practitioners would be scratched by these skeletons if they were not careful. At this moment, if one looked carefully, one would notice that almost every practitioner had some sort of injury on their body. The edges of their bodies were emitting bits of black gas, which carried a fishy smell. There's only one left. Ren Ziheng wiped the sweat off his face. With 3 lich dead, the strength of these skeletons has decreased. Chu Jinfeng nodded, but his face was still not optimistic. However, we have already expended a lot of energy. If we don't deal with them quickly, I'm afraid we will be in danger. Let's give our all. Ren Ziheng's eyes flashed with a serious look. Now that they had received all the help they could get, there was no other possibility of receiving any more help, so they could only rely on themselves. Chu Jinfeng, Di Beichun, Wen Ziren, Ren Ziheng turned to look at them. We will deal with the 4th lich, and the rest of you will be responsible for stopping these skeletons from approaching. Is there a problem? No problem. Almost at the moment Ren Ziheng announced his decision, everyone nodded and agreed without hesitation. In the next second, everyone surrounded Ren Ziheng and the others, using their own strength to help Di Beichun and the others open up a path so that they could maintain a certain amount of strength to deal with the liches. Now that there was only 1 lich left, it knew that it was in a very dangerous situation, so it struggled with all its might. All the skeletons surrounded the lich. As Di Beichun and the others got further and further away, Bailey Hongzhuang found that the effects of the zither technique had weakened. Suddenly, the zither music became dull and oppressive again. There was only 1 lich left, and its influence on everyone's minds had been greatly reduced. She believed that everyone would be able to bear it. Therefore, Bailey Hongzhuang decided to use this method to weaken the skeleton's fighting strength to the greatest extent. Chapter 3479. When the 4th lich saw Di Beichun and the others approaching, he screamed crazily. That sharp voice was almost able to pierce through people's eardrums, causing Di Beichun and the others to involuntarily stop their movements. Even with their ears covered with elemental energy, they still couldn't block out this extremely penetrating sound. It was as if the blood in their body was about to explode along with this sound. Many practitioners subconsciously covered their ears. This sound gave them a splitting headache and even made them forget where they were. Di Beichun only felt that the blood in his body was constantly boiling and agitating. Those weak blood vessels were constantly jumping, but they were emitting a power that made people's hearts palpitate. He tried his best to calm down his blood, but compared to the chanting of this lich, the effect of his efforts was extremely insignificant. How can this be? Di Beichun's eyes flashed with a frightened light. The previous 3 liches weren't this powerful. Compared to the lich he had dealt with before, this lich in front of him was simply an existence that defied the heavens. He even felt that these 2 liches weren't even the same species, because the difference in strength was just too great. Not only Di Beichun, but Ren Ziheng and the others were also looking at this lich in shock while trying their best to control themselves and not explode directly from this power. We have never encountered such a situation before. How can this lich's fighting strength be so strong? This is too scary. If this continues, I will not be able to control myself and will explode to death. A practitioner cried out in horror. He could even hear the sound of his blood exploding. He didn't dare to make any big movements, for fear that if he moved too much, his life would end here. Looking at the shock and unfamiliarity in the eyes of Ren Ziheng and the others, Di Beichun already knew that this situation had exceeded all of their expectations. This won't do. Under this chanting, not to mention dealing with this lich, even surviving is very difficult. Chu Jinfeng's expression was abnormally solemn. Now he only felt that every movement was extremely difficult. How could there be any possibility of fighting? Ren Ziheng and the others looked at each other in dismay. What Chu Jinfeng said was the truth. Almost all of them were in the same situation. They couldn't get close at all. This was because the closer they got, the greater the pressure they had to endure. Then what should we do? Xiren frowned. Why don't we go back? I'm afraid we can't deal with this guy. Di Beichen stared at the lich not far away. After a careful examination, he realized that this lich was indeed different from the previous ones. Look, this lich's spiritual fire seems to be brighter than the previous liches, and the color seems to be different as well. After listening to Di Beichen's words, everyone took a closer look and immediately noticed the slight difference. Indeed, this lich's spiritual fire is much brighter, and the redness is much denser than the other liches. What's going on? Chu Jinfeng's eyes were filled with astonishment. He hadn't seen liches many times before and had never encountered such a situation. If Di Beichen hadn't noticed it, he wouldn't have noticed it at all. Chapter 3480. When Ren Ziheng said this, everyone present could not help but be stunned. Their expressions immediately became abnormally ugly. If the lich had really evolved, it would mean that it would be even more difficult for them to deal with these skeletons in the future. The casualty rate would definitely increase greatly. Just the first level of the lich was already difficult for them to deal with, and the lich in front of them was simply too difficult for them to deal with. Even getting close to it was abnormally difficult. With their level of cultivation, there was a possibility that they would explode and die before they could even get close to it. This meant that they could only avoid this level of lich and not face it head-on. This was extremely terrifying. Lich can evolve? Xiren's eyes instantly widened. This fellow's influence was already very terrifying. If this fellow could evolve, wouldn't it create a huge problem for everyone? Ren Ziheng nodded. No matter what kind of species it is, there is always the possibility of evolution. Every time there's a certain number of skeletons, there will be a skeleton with extraordinary strength that will evolve. I have seen evolved skeletons before, but I have never seen an evolved lich. However, since skeletons can evolve, it is not impossible for a lich to evolve. This lich is obviously different from the other lich. If we can return alive, we must report this news. This is an incredible discovery, so everyone can be prepared. Chu Jinfeng's face was gloomy, and his voice was even more serious. When the lich saw that Ren Ziheng and the rest had stopped moving forward, it seemed to be very pleased. The chanting from its mouth became louder and louder, as if it already knew that this group of people would not be able to get close to it. Since we can't deal with this lich, let's retreat first. Di Beichen's eyes flashed with a wise and deep light. Now that there's only one lich left, its influence has decreased by a lot. In addition, Hongzhuang's zither music can balance it out. If we retreat back to the cave, we still have a chance of survival. At this moment, continuing to delay here would only exhaust the yuan energy in their bodies. It was not beneficial to them at all. On the contrary, it was very likely that they would not even be able to return. Ren Ziheng and the rest also had the same thought in their hearts. Now that they were in a stalemate, their chances of returning to the cave would decrease by a little. They really could not afford to waste time. All right, Ren Ziheng immediately nodded. Let's retreat. As soon as he said that, the eyes of all the cultivators in the group lit up. Then, they all turned around and walked towards the cave. Inside the cave, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others also noticed the actions of Ren Ziheng and the others. They could not help but feel puzzled. They've already reached the fourth lich. Why are they retreating? Shangguan Yingying's eyes were filled with confusion. The plan to kill the four liches would have succeeded. Why would he choose to give up under such circumstances? Bailey Hongzhuang didn't stop working. When she saw Di Beichen and the others returning, she tried her best to clear the skeletons so that everyone could return safely. Something must have happened. Otherwise, they wouldn't have turned back so suddenly, Jing Tianlang said in a deep voice. Chapter 3481. The fourth lich might be different. Jing Tianlang and Rin Zimei were astonished. This was the first time they had heard of such a theory. That can't be. The liches have always been the same. How can there be a difference? Rin Zimei frowned. Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head, but her attitude was very certain. This lich is indeed different. At least it's stronger than the previous three. How do you know? I'm using my zither to resist the chanting of this lich. Every time a lich falls, the effect of the chanting will weaken. The previous three liches had the same effect, but this lich is different. According to my judgment, this lich's strength should be equivalent to the combined strength of the previous two liches. Bailey Hongzhuang's face glowed with confidence. Even though she didn't know much about the liches, she was certain that her judgment was correct. The reason why they retreated is probably because the chanting is too strong. They can't get close to it. This was a reason why sound waves were so powerful. When she was fighting against the liches, she had already discovered that their chanting had a certain destructive effect on blood. Once a cultivator got close to it, not only would their mind be attacked by the sound waves, but their blood would also be affected. The slightest mistake would cause them to explode. However, skeletons didn't have brains or blood. They were just skeletons, so it didn't affect them at all. Speaking of which, she had to admit that the lich was indeed a very strange creature. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's clear judgment, Jing Tianlang and Rin Zimei couldn't help but look at each other. Logically speaking, they should be the ones who understood the characteristics of the liches better. However, Bailey Hongzhuang's appearance made them feel like they understood the liches better. They couldn't find anything wrong with her analysis. Compared to Rin Ziheng and the others' performance, it seemed like this was the truth. I've been here many times, but I've never even heard of a lich, let alone seen one with my own eyes. Jing Tianlang was still in disbelief. He had never heard of such a situation before. Just because you haven't heard of it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Just like this time, if I hadn't come to the wrong place to train, I wouldn't have known about the existence of this skeleton and the lich. Bailey Hongzhuang was very calm. After seeing the situation with the skeleton army and the lich, she understood that anything could happen in this world. If you think it's impossible, that's just your opinion. But the truth isn't like that. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Jing Tianlang opened his mouth, but found himself unable to refute. Indeed, he couldn't say that he was experienced and knowledgeable, but his judgment was definitely correct. If it's really as you say, then the situation is much more complicated. Rin Zimei felt that Bailey Hongzhuang's words were somewhat credible. She knew her brother. If there were no unforeseen circumstances, they would never give up so easily. Chapter 3482. Hearing Shangguan Yingying's words, Jing Tianlang and the others' expressions changed. Indeed, the most important thing for them now was to help the team return to the cave. Although the plan to kill all of the liches wasn't completed, the pressure on them had decreased by a lot. Jing Tianlang glanced at the situation of the people behind Bailey Hongzhuang. Everyone was trying their best to channel Yuan Li into Bailey Hongzhuang, but the number of people channeling Yuan Li into her had decreased by a lot. The cultivators who had used up all of their Yuan Li were now closing their eyes in the cave to recover their Yuan Li. As for the remaining cultivators, they didn't know how long they could last. Rin Ziheng and the others were already 1,000 meters away. It didn't seem like a very long distance, but in this situation, it wasn't easy to walk back every 100 meters. As Rin Ziheng and the others were preparing to return to the cave, the lich noticed their intentions and was pleased with itself. Its chanting became even sharper. The group slaughtered the skeletons along the way as they approached the cave. However, they realized that the lich had chased after them after knowing that they couldn't kill it. It seemed that it wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to kill all of them. Damn it, this lich is actually following us and affecting our strength. Chu Jinfeng's expression became ugly. He only hoped that the lich would stay as far away from them as possible. Unfortunately, this guy was sticking to them like a piece of dog skin plaster, which made him extremely depressed. We can't care so much now. Let's do our best to retreat. Once we retreat to a certain distance, Junior Sister Bailey's zither music will be able to compete with the lich's chanting. The pressure on us will also decrease. Ren Ziheng's expression wasn't any better than Chu Jinfeng's. Originally, they were chasing after the lich, but now it was the lich that was chasing after them. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others in the cave also noticed this situation. Their eyes were filled with surprise. It seems that junior sister Bailey's deduction is correct. This lich is indeed different. Otherwise, it wouldn't be chasing after Big Brother. Ren Zimei's eyes narrowed as she said in surprise. Jing Tianling originally didn't believe Bailey Hongzhuang's judgment, but after seeing this scene, he had no choice but to believe it. This lich has been following them all this time. Looks like they're in a bad situation. Shangguan Yingying's eyes were filled with worry. She could feel that Xiren and the others were slowing down. Deep Beichen endured the pressure of the lich's chanting as he advanced through the encirclement of the skeletons. The chanting became louder and louder, causing the attacks of the skeletons to become more and more powerful. Everyone who was already running out of spirit energy was no different from adding fuel to the fire. Suddenly, the lich's chanting changed, and a swamp suddenly appeared under their feet. The appearance of this quagmire was unexpected. No one had thought that such an unforeseen event would occur under such circumstances. By the time they reacted, several cultivators had already fallen into the quagmire. Di Beichen's reaction speed was extremely fast. His years of experience had made him exceptionally sensitive to danger. Therefore, he had reacted the moment the swamp appeared. His feet were wrapped in elemental energy, and he immediately dodged the swamp. Chapter 3483. Be careful. Di Beichen and the others had already shouted the moment they discovered the quagmire, reminding everyone of the danger. However, some of the cultivators in the middle of the swamp didn't even have time to react before they fell into the swamp. Chi-chi. A corrosive sound rang out, accompanied by a foul stench. Everyone was shocked to find that the cultivators who fell into the swamp were corroded into nothingness in the blink of an eye. Di Beichun reached out to save the other party, but he only managed to save one arm. Looking at the corroded state of the other arm, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. In just a short moment, the cultivators who were fighting side by side with them had turned into corpse water. It was a little too terrifying. Many of them didn't even have the chance to scream before they disappeared after falling into the swamp. Seeing this scene with their own eyes, they couldn't help but be shocked. More than that, they felt an indescribable anger. Their teammates died in front of them just like that, and they didn't even have the chance to save them. How unbearable was that? Almost at this moment, everyone's eyes turned red. Even if they didn't have much contact with each other before, they were teammates who had gone through life and death together. And now, their lives were taken away by these guys who were already dead. Damn it! Xiren looked at the black swamp on the ground and couldn't help but curse. These things are too despicable. What the hell is this thing that suddenly appeared? This isn't a swamp, it's a corpse pool. Ren Ziheng's expression was extremely ugly. Their situation was already very bad, but they didn't expect that the corpse pool would cause them to lose almost half of their teammates. The team that wasn't big to begin with instantly shrunk, and they didn't even have the chance to save them. Although they didn't fall into the corpse pool, this incident had a huge impact on their morale. Corpse pool? Di Beichan raised his eyebrows. It was his first time hearing this name. Ren Ziheng nodded. Previously, when we were rushing to the cave, a swamp suddenly appeared on the ground. Many skeletons would appear from within and drag the cultivators down, making it impossible to guard against. However, there is something even more terrifying than a swamp, and that is the corpse pool. If you fall into a swamp, as long as you are rescued in time, there is still a chance of survival. But if it is a corpse pond, once you fall in, there is no possibility of survival. Ren Ziheng shook his head and sighed. The corpse pool is filled with corpse water produced by the corrosion of corpses. It's extremely corrosive. No matter what it is, it can instantly corrode into nothingness. However, the probability of this appearing is not very high. It's just that the scale of the skeleton army this time is too large, so even the corpse pool has appeared. What kind of nonsense is this? Each one is more disgusting than the last. Xiren's face was full of anger and disgust. When he first saw the skeleton army, he felt that these dead things were very disgusting. However, the things he encountered now were more complicated than the last. He could not help but feel a sense of helplessness at the same time. Chapter 34:84. Due to this incident, almost everyone was in low spirits. Their morale had plummeted, and many of them had looks of despair in their eyes. They were already worried about whether they could make it back to the cave. Now that they had lost half of their fighting strength, they could no longer see any hope. In the cave, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others saw that half of the team had been suddenly lost, and the faces of the people who originally had some hope suddenly became very ugly. What was that? Bailey Hongzhuang turned to look at Jing Tianlang. Why did we lose so many people? In front of her was a sea of skeletons. She could only see that the team had suddenly decreased, but she didn't know why. It seems like a swamp appeared, and we fell in. Shangguan Yingying's face was ashen. Fortunately, Di Beichun and Xiren were safe. Otherwise, she wouldn't know what to do. Jing Tianlang shook his head and said, "This isn't a swamp. It's a corpse pool. Once we fall in, we won't even have a chance to save them." The corpse pool wouldn't appear so easily. Now that it suddenly appeared, it might have something to do with the last lich. Run Zimei's expression was grave. The lich never chased after cultivators before. This lich is too special. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Run Zimei with a slightly surprised look. It seemed that the situation they encountered this time was much more dangerous than the situation Ren Zimei and the others had encountered before. So to say, they were really lucky. Even with such a small probability, they were still able to encounter them. When they returned, they would have to properly thank those guys who allowed them to come here. This time, they had really seen the world. Di Beichun and the others were almost shrouded in a desperate atmosphere. They quickly said, "Everyone, don't lose confidence. We have to fight for this last hope." The probability of them returning alive was already very small. If everyone was so pessimistic, they could only die here together. No matter what, we have to go all out. Even if we die here in the end, we have to bury these skeletons with us. A determined look appeared on Chu Jinfeng's face. At this moment, he also felt that there was no hope of survival. However, he was unwilling to let these skeletons take advantage of him. At the very least, he had to drag enough skeletons down with him. That's right. Even if I die here, I'll make sure these guys die with me. Forget it. I won't be able to live until dawn anyway. I might as well stay here and fight with these guys. For a moment, many cultivators had frenzied looks on their faces. Crazy thoughts were spreading in their minds. Seeing everyone like this, Di Beichun's expression didn't become better. Instead, it became more serious. He didn't want everyone to give up hope. No matter how small the possibility was, they had to at least try. Don't despair, everyone. We may still have a chance to survive. As long as there is a glimmer of hope, we have to give it a try, Di Beichun said. Hearing Di Beichun's words, everyone still didn't have the slightest sign of improvement. Seeing this, Di Beichun couldn't help but frown. Now that they were surrounded, if they still couldn't unite, then it would really be over. Chapter 34:85. Beichun. Bailey Hongzhuang stood up. When she noticed that Di Beichun and the others were in such a situation, she had already predicted what would happen next. Once everyone felt that they had no chance of survival, it was often the easiest choice for people to make. However, whether it was Di Beichun or Wen Xiren, it was impossible for them to give up the hope of survival. Similarly, Bailey Hongzhuang and Shangguan Yingying would not watch them get into an accident in front of them. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's voice, Di Beichun also saw Bailey Hongzhuang. The two of them looked at each other and understood each other's decision. In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang directly said to Jing Tianlang and the others, "Under such circumstances, they can't come back alive. We have to rescue them." As soon as she said that, the expressions of the cultivators in the cave changed. Their gazes were very complicated. In their opinion, Di Beichun and the others were already dead. There was no chance of survival at all. If they continued to stay in the cave, they might be able to hold on until the next day. However, if they went out, it was very likely that they would all be wiped out. No matter who it was, everyone would have a selfish mentality, especially when facing death. Nothing was more important than one's own life. They can't come back alive. If we go out, we'll just be throwing our lives away. At this moment, a cultivator said with a sullen face. Hearing that, Shangwan Yingying's face immediately turned pale. They went out to win a chance for us to live. Now that they're in trouble, are we just going to sit back and do nothing? Things have already developed to this point. It's wise to cut our losses in time. Another cultivator agreed. You're all too cold-blooded. Shangwan Yingying looked at the crowd in disbelief. They were so united before, but now they had become so cold-blooded and heartless. She found it hard to accept the change. This is a choice that everyone often makes. If it's still possible, we'll naturally save them. However, given the current situation, they're already on the path to death. Whether we save them or not, the result will be the same. On the contrary, more people will die. The man glanced at Shangwan Yingying and said, if it wasn't for Xiren being in that group, I'm sure you would have the same thoughts as me, haha. The man chuckled. In such an environment, it seemed particularly ironic. Shangwan Yingying glared at the man. What do you know? I'm not as cold as you. People like you should die. Don't go too far. The man couldn't help but get angry after hearing Shangwan Yingying's words. Seeing the conflict between Shangwan Yingying and the man developing in this way, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but raise her hand to stop their conflict. Yingying, these selfish people have their own thoughts. We don't need to care too much. Bailey Hongzhuang's face was cold. In the next second, her eyes focused on the man. No matter what reason you put on us, under such circumstances, as long as there's a glimmer of hope, I can't just watch my teammates die in front of us. Chapter 3486. I admit that a large part of the reason why I'm doing this is because Deep Beiqian is in the team. Bailey Hongzhuang's expression was calm. I'm not a hero, but the reason why they're willing to stand out is to fight for some hope for us. Are we just going to watch them throw away their lives like this? Don't you feel the slightest bit of pain and guilt in your hearts when you see them lose their lives because of us? If everyone is as indifferent as you, I'm sure everyone will die. Bailey Hongzhuang's voice was cold. She never thought of herself as a hero or a savior, nor did she have much sympathy. However, after experiencing everyone's unity and sacrifice, she felt that everyone had become a single entity. Regardless of whether these people were trying to increase their strength or to eliminate the skeletons that threatened the Shengxian continent, they were at least contributing to the stability of the Shengxian continent. Sacrifices were often unavoidable, but as long as there was a glimmer of hope, they should not give up. Otherwise, they would be too indifferent. At least at this moment, Bailey Hongzhuang was unwilling to see everyone fall like this from the bottom of her heart. Following Bailey Hongzhuang's words, everyone's expression changed a little. It had to be said that these words had indeed touched the depths of their hearts. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang like this, Jing Tianlong's gaze constantly changed. He never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang would be able to say something like this. It had greatly exceeded his expectations. Speaking of which, Bailey Hongzhuang was only an outer hall disciple. This was her first time coming to the training grounds of the inner hall disciples, yet she was able to have such awareness. In comparison, the awareness of the other inner hall disciples was much lower. All this time, Jing Tianlang had never taken Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three seriously. This was because he always felt that the four of them were putting on an act. After all, outer hall disciples did not have many opportunities to come into contact with inner hall disciples. Usually, outer hall disciples would not give up on the opportunity to befriend inner hall disciples. This would bring them a lot of convenience and benefit their lives in the outer hall. Even though Bailey Hongzhuang's previous performance had made him look at her in a new light, he had never thought that the former's awareness could reach such a level. I won't force all of you to follow me, but I hope that those who still have some courage and know how to be grateful can stand out. Bailey Hongzhuang stared at the people present. She did not know how many people would choose to stand up at this time, but she always believed that there would be people who would stand up. Junior sister Bailey is right. She's only an outer palace disciple, yet she's able to think this far. Yet, you all are still so selfish. Don't you feel ashamed? Ren Zimei was the first to step forward. She had the same thoughts as Bailey Hongzhuang. Every time she saw a comrade fall in front of her, she felt terrible. Moreover, her big brother was also in this team. She absolutely could not sit back and do nothing. Even if Bailey Hongzhuang hadn't stood up, she would have. In her opinion, if she were to shrink back now, it would be worse than death. They are just women, yet they have such determination. Could it be that a group of men like us can't compare to a few women? Chapter 3487. Sensing the burning gazes of Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest, the cultivators present had complicated expressions. Under the selflessness of Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest, they could not help but avert their gazes. Everyone knew that they should stand out under such circumstances, but no one was willing to give up their lives just like that. Now that more than half of the night had passed, as long as they persevered a little longer, there would be hope for survival. I'll go with you. At this moment, a cultivator took the lead and stood up. He walked to the side of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, his face full of determination. Seeing the cultivator's appearance, Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest were pleasantly surprised. As long as one cultivator was willing to stand out, it would be great. After the cultivator stood out, the other cultivators gradually stood out as well. There were also their brothers and companions in the group. When no one stood out, they did not have the thought of being the first to stand out, because they knew very well that there would be very few people who would be willing to stand out under such circumstances. However, now that someone had taken the lead, they naturally did not mind joining in. Previously, when they were still Outer Palace disciples, perhaps they were more indifferent. However, when they became Inner Palace disciples, they had been supporting each other during their daily training. Everything had changed. The reason why humans were different from demonic beasts was that they had emotions. Selfishness was unavoidable in many things, but sacrificing for emotions was the difference between humans and demonic beasts. I'll join too. At most, I'll perish together with these skeletons. Soon, cultivators stood out one after another. Looking at this scene, a touch of joy appeared on Bailey Hongzhuang's face. Fortunately, everyone still had a bit of courage and was not so cold. Although everyone was struggling and hesitating, in truth, all of this had happened in a short period of time. Bailey Hongzhuang did not have any other thoughts about the other cultivators who did not have the intention to stand out. People who walked different paths could not make plans together. In this world, it was impossible to expect everyone to have the same thoughts as one. However, these people were not worth befriending in the future, because leaving one's back to these indifferent cultivators could lead to betrayal at any time. Since everyone is ready, we will go out and kill a bloody path and help them return to the cave. Bailey Hongzhuang's face was firm and decisive. She believed that nothing was impossible. Junior sister Bailey, what do you plan to do? Renzime looked at Bailey Hongzhuang. Although Bailey Hongzhuang was only an Outer Palace disciple, after everything that had happened, everyone felt that she was their backbone. The only thing we can do now is to fight our way out and meet up with them as soon as possible. I'll be at the front and use my zither music technique to attack these skeletons. The zither music technique will be released in an arc. Therefore, all of you can form a circle with me as the center. This is the most efficient way. However, I'll need your yuan power to support me. Bailey Hongzhuang looked solemn and serious. At a time like this, they could not afford to make any mistakes. In fact, when they made this decision, their lives were already hanging by a thread. Chapter 3488. Everyone was a cultivator who had experienced the world. After Bailey Hongzhuang explained the plan, they immediately understood what to do. Therefore, everything went smoothly. Let's go. As Bailey Hongzhuang's voice fell, everyone maintained their original formation and quickly set off. At the same time, Di Baichen noticed Bailey Hongzhuang's call and understood Bailey Hongzhuang's idea. He immediately led his team closer to the cave. Everyone, don't despair. The cultivators in the cave have come out to meet us. Di Baichen's voice sounded. Everyone, who was originally filled with despair, could not help but look in the direction of the cave after hearing Di Baichen's words. In their line of sight, they saw Bailey Hongzhuang and a group of cultivators walking out of the cave together. Among them, Bailey Hongzhuang walked at the front of the team. The breeze blew, and her hair fluttered. Her white clothes accentuated her elegant and refined temperament. A guqin was in her hand. Her 5 fingers fluttered, and the sound of the guqin poured out. The surrounding skeletons retreated under the influence of the guqin sound. Around Bailey Hongzhuang, the other cultivators walked forward with her as the center. Seeing this scene, a glimmer of hope appeared in the eyes of the cultivators in Di Beichen's team. Their hearts were filled with emotions. None of them thought that the other party would be willing to rescue them when they were already in a situation where they were going to die. This kind of gratitude arose spontaneously. They actually came out to meet us. A cultivator's words were filled with excitement, but his expression became a little depressed. With our current situation, it's really too difficult to go back alive. If they come out now, it's very likely that they'll be sending themselves to their deaths. Ren Ziheng and the others could not help but feel excited. The other party's actions were really timely, giving them a glimmer of hope in their despair. Everyone, don't think so much. As long as there is a glimmer of hope, we have to strive to survive. Di Beichen's voice was slightly heavy. The situation in front of them was indeed very bad, but it was far from the point where they were desperate. Let's not waste time. Let's set off quickly. Ren Ziheng quickly understood all of this. They're already approaching us at full speed. We have to strive to be closer to them. As soon as these words came out, the cultivators present had a look of excitement on their faces. Without saying a word, they followed Ren Zixing's people and charged forward. Perhaps they saw hope, or perhaps they were moved by the other party's sacrifice. When a person was on the brink of death, their will to live was usually abnormally strong, and the power that erupted from them was not something that could be compared to usual. After Bailey Hongzhuang and the other cultivators in the cave looked at each other. They're just sending themselves to their deaths. That's right. It's almost daybreak now. As long as we can hold on until daybreak, we'll be able to survive. These lunatics are willing to throw away their lives. So what can we say? Then let them go. Heroes always feel that they are exceptionally great before they die. Chapter 3489. After Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest went out, they went all out. The sharp and smooth sound of the zither continuously flowed out from the gaps between their fingers. Very quickly, the area in front of Bailey Hongzhuang was cleared. Seeing this, everyone quickened their pace and quickly rushed in the direction of Di Beichen and the rest. Their elemental energy was not abundant, so they could only conserve their elemental energy and move forward as fast as possible. At the same time, Di Beichen and the rest were also trying their best to get closer to Li Hongzhang and the rest. Once they met up, their chances of survival would be greatly increased. Ren Zimei and the rest followed closely behind Bailey Hongzhuang. With Bailey Hongzhuang clearing the way, they felt that the influence of the skeletons was greatly reduced. Originally, the strength of the skeletons was greatly reduced under the suppression of Bailey Hongzhuang's zither music. After the Lich noticed Bailey Hongzhuang's actions, he immediately set her as his target. The Lich's chanting became louder and louder, constantly controlling the surrounding skeletons to attack Bailey Hongzhuang. He was very dissatisfied. His chanting had always been invincible, but now there was actually someone who could compete with him. After the Lich changed his target to Bailey Hongzhuang, Di Beichen and the rest felt the pressure on them lessen. However, the pressure on Bailey Hongzhuang increased by a lot. Junior Bailey, this Lich seems to have changed his target to you. Ren Zimei, who was following closely behind Bailey Hongzhuang, noticed this scene and couldn't help but frown. Being targeted by a Lich was not a good thing. She could feel that Bailey Hongzhuang was under a lot of pressure, and the speed of her elemental energy consumption was greatly increased. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang's expression didn't change. It's a good thing that he has shifted his attention to me. Now that he is further away from us, the pressure on us is also less. Originally, the Lich had been following Ren Zixing and the rest, but when the Lich changed his target to Bailey Hongzhuang, he began to use all his strength to get closer to Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes flashed with a strong desire to fight. She also wanted to have a good fight with this Lich. She wanted to know whether her zither music or the Lich's chanting was better. Moreover, this Lich was different from the other Liches. If she could get closer, she would be able to understand this Lich. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang could still remain calm in this situation, Ren Zimei's eyes couldn't help but admire her. The more it was in this kind of situation, the more one could see the fighting qualities of a practitioner. Even the practitioners in the group who had been fighting with the skeletons for many years couldn't help but be flustered in this dangerous situation. However, Bailey Hongzhuang was able to remain so calm in this training ground of the skeletons. This didn't mean that Bailey Hongzhuang was a newborn calf that was not afraid of the tiger, but it was because she had enough experience in dealing with this kind of danger. If she didn't see it with her own eyes, she would also find it hard to believe. However, she couldn't help but admit that after seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's confident appearance, even the panic in her heart had dissipated by a lot. She was sure that Bailey Hongzhuang would definitely not be a simple person in the future. Not only that, Di Beiqian and the rest's fighting qualities were also not simple. Chapter 3490. The Lich's attention has been completely attracted by junior sister Bailey. Chu Jinfeng could not help but observe the situation after noticing that the pressure on them had been greatly reduced. He saw that the Lich had already abandoned them and was charging towards Bailey Hongzhuang's team. Di Beiqian nodded slightly. Let's take advantage of the fact that the Lich's attention is not on us and quickly regroup. Won't junior sister Bailey and the rest be in danger? Our speed cannot be compared to the Lich's. Chu Jinfeng furrowed his brows. He was already extremely grateful that Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest had chosen to come to their aid in such a dangerous situation. He really did not want to see Bailey Hongzhuang and the rest in danger. Don't worry, since Hongzhuang has chosen to come to our aid, she has already made plans in her heart. There won't be any problems in the short term. The most important thing for us now is to regroup as soon as possible. Compared to Chu Jinfeng's anxiety, Di Beiqian appeared to be much calmer. This was because he had already seen Bailey Hongzhuang's confidence when he exchanged glances with Bailey Hongzhuang. There was always a way out. The situation in front of them was far from the point of despair. Bang! The sound of a heavy object falling to the ground rang out. A cultivator had accidentally fallen to the ground under the attack of a skeleton. The number of skeletons was increasing, and they had already surrounded them. Their elemental energy could only support them for a few hundred meters. As the cultivator fell to the ground, the skeleton's attack immediately attacked the cultivator. It really wanted to trample on him. Seeing this scene, everyone immediately wanted to save the cultivator. However, the speed of the skeleton was simply too fast. They did not even have time to react and could only watch helplessly as the cultivator died in the hands of the skeleton. Just as everyone thought that the cultivator was definitely going to die, an unfamiliar energy suddenly exploded. The air was suddenly filled with a bloody aura. Di Beiqian's aura suddenly increased. With lightning speed, he directly pulled the fallen cultivator behind him. At the same time, he exchanged a blow with the skeleton. Kacha! Under Di Beiqian's fist, the skeleton fell to the ground and directly turned into slag. Seeing Di Beiqian's thunderous actions, everyone couldn't help but be astonished. None of them had thought that Di Beiqian would have such strength. It seemed that they had underestimated Di Beiqian. Ren Ziheng looked at Di Beiqian in shock. Junior brother Di, is this the blood aura field? Although he felt that the possibility of this was very small, Ren Ziheng still felt that this was undoubtedly the blood aura field. Because the demon training tower was on Penglai Island, everyone had always been interested in the inheritance of the killing aura. It was just that no one had been able to obtain it in the end. Under such circumstances, they had some understanding of the killing aura. Seeing that Ren Ziheng had guessed his blood aura field at a glance, Di Beiqian nodded and said, "Not bad. Senior brother Ren has good eyesight." His guess was confirmed by Di Beiqian. Ren Zixing's amazement in his heart became even stronger. He had long felt that Di Beiqian's performance was extraordinary. However, he did not know that Di Beiqian had obtained such an inheritance. He had tried to challenge the demon training tower. However, the difficulty was simply too high. Therefore, he could only choose to return with regret. However, Di Beiqian was able to obtain the inheritance of the blood aura field. Just this point alone was enough to prove his strength. Chapter 3491. Previously, Ren Ziheng had always thought highly of Di Beichun, but he did not regard Di Beichun as a cultivator who could be on par with him. Now, however, it seemed that Di Beichun's development potential might be stronger than his. Firstly, Di Beichun was still very young, but he had already reached such a cultivation level. Secondly, Di Beichun was able to obtain the inheritance of the blood aura field, which proved that his cultivation talent was much stronger than ordinary cultivators. Now, Di Beichun's strength was not as good as his only because he had cultivated for a shorter time. With the eruption of the blood aura field, Di Beichun's cultivation was not far from his. As long as Di Beichun was given some more time, it was very likely that he would surpass him. Faintly, Ren Ziheng was certain that Di Beichun would definitely be a member of the Inner Palace disciples in the future. Moreover, he would be an extremely terrifying cultivator. Not only Ren Ziheng, but Chu Jinfeng and other cultivators could not help but look at Di Beichun in a new light. The blood aura field, that was something that only 1 in 10,000 cultivators could obtain. It was said to be 1 in 10,000, but in fact, it was 1 in 10 million. Junior brother D, I really didn't expect you to have such strength. Just on this point, I can't compare with you. Chu Jinfeng patted Di Beichun's shoulder, and his attitude quietly changed a little. No matter where, strength would always be taken seriously. Just on this point, they already knew that Di Beichun's position in the Penglai Palace would definitely not be low in the future. Now, they were Inner Palace disciples, and Di Beichun was just an Outer Palace disciple. His position was not comparable to theirs, but presumably it would not be long before Di Beichun's position would reach the same level as theirs, or even surpass them. Senior brother, you are too modest. Di Beichun's expression did not change. His handsome face was still full of determination. He had not used the blood aura field because it consumed his primary energy faster. With all his current primary energy, he could not support it for long. Junior brother D, thank you for saving my life. The cultivator who was saved also recovered at this moment and looked at Di Beichun gratefully. If Di Beichun's speed was not fast enough, he would have lost his life. Di Beichun smiled faintly. It's what I should do. Senior brother, you don't have to mind. Ji Xiuyu shook his head. I can't thank you enough. Junior brother D saved my life. I will definitely remember this. Just how dangerous was the situation? If Di Beichun had not saved him in time, he would have already become a ghost under the hands of the skeletons. Just now, he had almost given up all hope. He didn't think that he would be able to survive. His emotions were extremely complicated. Seeing was this matters. SSS. SSSSS. It all happened in the blink of an eye. Everyone did not waste too much time because of this matter. Instead, they continued to try their best to get closer to Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. As the crowd got closer and closer to Bailey Hongzhuang, they found that under the sound of the zither, the skeleton's fighting strength had weakened a lot, so they moved faster. Everyone's eyes flashed with the light of hope. As long as they could gather together, there was a rare hope of survival.